Chapter 111. But there was another individual responding to Kale other than Pendrick. Human, I know who he is. Do you want to know? He was the elf that stood behind the elf that talked to you in the inn. I remember everything because I am a great and mighty dragon. No, I already know who he is. Kale started to frown after his mind became rowdy with Rayon's unnecessary explanation. And why is he like that? Kale was anxious about Pendrick's reaction. Pendrick slightly lifted the hood of his robe. Although his ears were still covered, Kale could see the Z-shaped scar around Pendrick's eyes. Sir, we met at the inn. I remember that we made eye contact. This was true. Kale had flinched after seeing the scar by Pendrick's eyes. I see. However, Kale feigned ignorance until the end. He also made his responses as short as possible. He had learned from his experiences. Cannot say too much. He kept ending up being dragged into messes the more he talked to someone. Kale turned away from Pendrick and started to walk in the opposite direction. He was heading toward the top of the pit. Crumble. Crumble. The black rocks broke as he stepped on them. Kale's red hair fluttered in the wind. He'll stop thinking about me now. Of course, Kale was wrong. Sir, did you earn an ancient power? Kale did not stop walking, even after Pendrick started to speak. Yes. He gave a short answer. Pendrick flinched at the cold and indifferent voice. He looked at the back of the man who was walking away. Why would Pendrick have come here even though the village was in trouble? It was because of the scary feeling he got from the lava. Pendrick was aware of his status as an elf who could not handle an elemental. The only things that he had going for him were his healing and fighting abilities. For someone like him, that scary lava was a tempting power. He wanted the power to help his village. He thought that the fire might be able to burn the thing that was a poison to the elves. However, ancient powers were things that required a lot of luck to acquire. They were said to have predestined owners. Excuse me. Pendrick started to run toward Kale. Kale flinched at the sound of someone running toward him. Why is he following me? Kale started to walk faster. However, he still responded to Pendrick. What is it? Could you please lend me the strength of your ancient power? Kale thought that he shouldn't have responded. Kale started to frown. How could someone suddenly launch a hook like this? Kale wanted to sigh, but just turned around with the frown still on his face. He then flinched. An elf was standing behind him. Pendrick had lowered his hood to reveal his elf ears. The novel had mentioned that the whales were so beautiful they could put the elves to shame. However, as one of the main character's party members, Pendrick had a different kind of beauty compared to other elves. He was someone who lived in despair as an elf who could not handle an elemental. However, he still had a purpose as a healer. Although his face was pale, Kale could not deny that Pendrick was handsome. Is that elf sick? He seems very pale. Although Pendrick looked pale, he was not sick. But he sure was handsome. Kale continued to stare at the elf, Pendrick. This made Pendrick start to think. He really isn't an average person. Kale did not even flinch after seeing an elf. Although Kale was not speaking, Kale's gaze seemed to be telling him to hurry up and explain. Since he had brought it up, he needed to explain the details. I am an elf and I live in the elf village. Kale held back a sigh. He turned his gaze away and looked far away as Pendrick started to explain. He felt like his luck was really bad. It was always a mess whenever he left his house. At that moment, something Pendrick said caught Kale's attention. An organization has invaded our village in an attempt to steal the branch of the world tree. What? Wouldn't the elf village be destroyed if you lose the branch? Kale was so shocked that he accidentally blurted that out loud. The world tree was an existence of legends. Most fantasy worlds were said to be supported by a world tree. However, the world tree wasn't really that grand of an existence. However, it existed in a special location and helped the creatures of nature live peacefully. As for the elves, they used a branch of the world tree with permission in order to build their villages. It was a village made with the help of the trees and nature. The elves lived in that village, and the world tree's branch used illusion magic to let the elves live without danger. The elf village would disappear if the world tree's branch disappeared. Yes, it will be destroyed. Pendrick hid his shock as he calmly answered. He then started to observe Kale more thoroughly. There was a reason this person did not become shocked after seeing that he was an elf. He knows a lot about elves. Unlike most people who had fantasies and curiosities about elves, this man in front of him had some knowledge regarding elves and elementals. That is why the elves and elementals are currently fighting against that organization. Kale maintained his expression as he asked about that organization. Who is that organization? We are not sure. However, they are wearing clothes that have a red star and 5 white stars. We could not determine the identity of the organization, even after conducting an investigation. Crazy bastards. Kale could not tell why that organization, called ARM or or whatever it was doing these things. They really are terrible people. Those baddies must be punished. They want to destroy the elves' homes. I will destroy the world if our house is destroyed. Kale ignored Rayon and asked what he wanted to ask. So why do you need my ancient power? He wanted to know what his power had to do with their battle. Pendrick asked a question instead of answering Kale's question. Do you know what is the most poisonous substance toward elves? Kale knew the answer. As much as he didn't want to, he definitely knew the answer. Kale let out a sigh. The elves and dark elves did not have a good relationship with each other because of dead mana. I do not know if this power of fire will be able to burn dead mana. Dead mana was like poison to the elves. That was why the Guardian Knight had left his elemental at the village when he went out to investigate. Elementals were not affected by dead mana, so they were currently the ones protecting the elf village. Pendrick's gaze became even more pensive. This was someone who really knew a lot about elves. It was difficult to find such a person. I still want to test it out. Please help us. They are spraying water infused with dead mana, and even the elementals could not take care of it. And why should I help you? Pendrick was suddenly at a loss of words. However, Kale was thinking about someone at this time. The person he was thinking about was someone who was always in pain but carried on because the pain was not very severe. He was thinking about the necromancer, Mary. Since he planned to put her to use quite a bit, wouldn't it be great to erase some of his debt to Mary? Especially if things were going to be like this anyway. That, we will reward you for your assistance. Pendrick stumbled as he answered. Kale just asked right back. Reward. Pendrick flinched after seeing that Kale was interested. What should they give to a human? The elf village was poor in human standards. It did not have money, treasures, or jewels. All they had was wood. Yes sir, that, you see, for your reward . No need. Excuse me. There's no way elves living in nature have money or jewels to give. Of course, Pendrick the healer and the elementals could still give him a reward. However, Kale did not say that part. Why? Elves like humans who are not materialistic. Elves were a race that liked being minimalists. Kale had already made up his mind, especially since Rayon was strongly encouraging him from a while ago. Human, I want to punch that magic spearman in the face. Since the strongest in their party was saying that, what could Kale do about it? Furthermore, Pendrick had lived until now because Kale had twisted the story. He didn't want him to die here. There was also something that Kale needed to verify. I will help you. Really? Pendrick could see the man starting to smile for the first time. It is not like I can just ignore someone in trouble. It was an indifferent tone, but Pendrick started to feel thankful. He knew that the men in front of him had no reason to help him at all. That was why he was having such a strong reaction to the man's willingness to help. Pendrick opened his mouth to speak. However, the man started to speak before he could say anything. Plus, that organization sounds like those punks I have met before. What do you mean? Kale looked toward the other peaks and started to speak as if he was reminiscing about the past. There was a time when I went to help the whale tribe. They had given dead mana to the mermaids to spread mermaid poison throughout the ocean. How terrible. They were trying to kill the ocean and everything in it. Pendrick was angry. And they tried to kill the people at the Roan Kingdom's capital using bombs. I barely managed to prevent that. Pendrick suddenly recalled an incident. The Roan Kingdom's Plaza Terror incident. He had learned that people who seemed to be from the same organization had attempted such terrible deeds when he went out to investigate. He also heard the name of a noble who was said to have an ancient power. They had said that he had used his ancient power to save the citizens before falling over in exhaustion. That person also had red hair. Cale Henitus. Pendrick could see that the man still had a gentle smile on his face. You know my name. Ah. Pendrick could not help but gasp. This really was not an average person. Human, why are you smiling like when you are with the Crown Prince? Are you trying to skim someone? Cale could hear Rayon's voice, but he ignored it as he asked Pendrick. Tell me the location of your village. I will grab my group and head over right away. Pendrick bowed his head. Thank you very much. He could see Cale Henitus, the person he felt was very cold at first, gently smiling like his thank you was enough compensation for helping the elf village. Of course, Cale was smiling because he was thinking about how to take as much as he could from the elves. Rustle, rustle. Cale felt the leaves flying by his face as he rushed forward. Tap, tap. The kittens, On and Hong, were jumping across the trees while keeping up with Cale. Cale Nim. Choi Han approached Cale. Cale's group was currently heading for the valley between the 7th and 8th peaks of the 10-Finger Mountains. What? Choi Han started to wince at Cale's cold response. He then asked in an awkward voice. Do we have to dress like this? Yes. May I ask why? One reason is to hide our identities. Ron, Beacrox, and Locke, who were following behind Cale and Choi Han, started to pay attention to their conversation. Cale and Choi Han continued to speak while not slowing down at all. And the other reasons? Choi Han could see Cale smiling. To annoy them. Choi Han closed his mouth. In his opinion, Cale's real reason had more to do with annoying Arm than hiding their identities. Choi Han was not wrong. Cale did not like this secret organization that continued to get in his way of living peacefully. Human, do I just need to stay far away like this? Cale nodded his head. Rayon was flying high up in the sky, but, as a dragon, he should have been able to see Cale's nod. Cale had told Rayon to stay out of the elementals' range since they were going to the elf village. However, Rayon was still nearby, just in case something went wrong. Young Master Nim, I can see it. Cale raised his head after hearing Ron speak. Something odd could be seen in the distance. Clang, clang. Bang. They could hear the sounds of swords clashing together, as well as the sound of explosions. How odd. Cale agreed with Locke's statement. The valley between the 7th and 8th peaks was fluctuating, and they could see a different location flashing through the fluctuation. That was the elf village. Cale shared his sentiments while looking at the entrance to the village. What a mess. There were elementals that materialized into physical bodies, as well as some elves who were fighting against the secret organization. Let's go. Cale started to smirk. He quickly rushed toward the boundary of the village. On. Fog covered Cale's body. Cale did not need to say anything else for Hong to immediately start spreading his poison inside the fog. A poisonous fog soon protected Cale's body. I will take the lead. Beacrox put on a white glove as he stepped forward. Choi Han was already in front of him. Young Master Nim, I will quietly follow behind you. Cale could see Ron slowly disappear into the forest without making a noise. Clang. Cale turned around after hearing the noise, only to see that Locke's claws had grown. Locke awkwardly smiled, as if he was embarrassed. He was still very shy. Cale looked back to the front as he approached the loud elf village. Bong. Ugh. Screech. It was a mess with the screams of humans, animals, elves, and elementals. The strong individuals within the elf village suddenly stopped moving. All of their gazes headed toward the 7th peak. They could see people heading toward them quickly from the 7th peak. More enemies. One of the elves shouted in disbelief. However, the elf soon flinched. One of the enemy's arms was missing. The person who cut the arm off was none other than the person who was in front of the new group of who he thought to be the enemies. He could see it clearly once they got closer. Who are you? One of the enemies shouted. They had black outfits with 5 white stars and a single red star. Some of the enemies started to shout in disbelief. The elves could see that the outfits the people coming from the 7th peak were wearing was the same as the enemies, however, it was done with a terrible patch job. The people wearing outfits that had stars that looked like a newbie had sewed them on soon approached them. Hyung Nim. It is them. Pendrick. What did you say? Them. The elf's eyes became wide after hearing Pendrick's words. At that moment, Kale arrived at the battlefield with Choi Han and Beacrox in front of him. He could see a familiar face. Choi Han, who was in the front, started to speak. Won't they be angry? Kale's group was pretending to be the secret organization, just like they had done at Heist Island. Kale casually responded. I want them to get angry. Wouldn't that be great? It definitely would. Kale listened to Choi Han's response as he looked toward the familiar magic spearman. It was the same one who thought he was going to get away safely from Heist Island, yet ended up getting injured by Rayon's mana arrow. Ha! The magic spearman, who had a spear in his hand, let out a gasp of disbelief. He looked toward the people who made him run away from Heist Island before sighing and starting to speak. They're driving me crazy. Hearing a villain saying something like that made Kale start to smile. Just who are you? Choi Han responded to the magic spearman's question. The secret organization. Choi Han was very confident with his answer now. Kale could see Choi Han starting to smirk through the opening in his mask. He couldn't believe that Choi Han was smirking. It was not fitting Choi Han's character. What a bunch of lunatics. They could feel the magic spearman's true feelings. He looked angry and annoyed. Kale started to smirk even wider than Choi Han. So why do you do these bad things to harm other people? Hey kid, who are they? Who are they? There were 2 people who seemed to be working with the magic spearman. There was a boy who seemed to be about 12 years old, as well as a middle-aged man. Neither of them are as strong as the magic spearman. However, the young boy is special. Their handy detector, Rayon, explained to Kale. Furthermore, Pendrick had already described these 2 to Kale. The young boy is a tamer. Based on the language he uses, it seems that he just looks like a young boy. He made the animals that seem to have lost their will to spread the dead mana against the elves. The middle-aged swordsman protects the tamer. They could also see hundreds of soldiers from the secret organization. On this side, the elves had at max 200 adult elves. Even with the help of the elementals, it was no wonder that the elves were struggling, especially since the secret organization was using dead mana. Hyungs, who are you and why are you pretending to be us? Kale made eye contact with the tamer boy who was looking at him. Tamers were said to have special abilities. They could become friends with living animals or monsters and fight together with them, or they could take away the animal's will and make them like a zombie. An animal or monster that has their will taken away can never return to normal. Even if they are released from the taming, they will go berserk until they die. Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr There seemed to be at least 200 or 300 animals. The animals seemed to have been poisoned by dead mana as their entire bodies were filled with black veins. The wolves living in the valley all lost their wool once the young boy's eyes turned white. Our biggest issue is the tamer boy directing the animals to release the dead mana. Each time he does that, he makes his subordinates temporarily retreat so that they are not affected by the dead mana, and the elves can only avoid the animals with the dead mana and retreat as well. Since they control the timing of that, we are unable to launch a proper attack. And there were 2 strong individuals protecting the young boy. It was at that moment. Boom. One of the animals suddenly blew up. The wolf that blew up because it could not handle the dead mana slowly disappeared without a trace as black smoke started to rise from its corpse. I cannot forgive them. Kale turned around to see Locke's eyes turning red. Of all the animals out there, the animals that the tamer boy had picked were all wolves, foxes, or similar animals. The young boy's eyes suddenly turned wide. Ah! There are claws on that man's hands. He must be from the wolf tribe. Wow, I want to make him mine. Crunch. Locke's teeth became sharp and his anger was visible on his face. Choi Han stood in front of Locke and covered his sword with his aura. Both the tamer boy and the middle-aged man flinched after seeing the aura that showed that Choi Han was a sword master. The middle-aged man asked the magic spearman. Are they the ones who messed with the mermaid incident? Yes, it was those crazy bastards. A cold voice interrupted the middle-aged man and the magic spearman who were looking at each other. You weaklings sure have a lot to say. The two men turned toward the source of the voice. Kale lightly laughed and gave the order to the owner of the cold voice who was looking at him. You can fight. Beacrox put on 4 pairs of white gloves to get revenge for his father. There was a long sword in his hand. However, the first scream did not come because of Beacrox. My arm. One of the secret organization's soldiers had lost their left arm. They clenched onto their shoulder as they started to scream. However, they could not see the person that had cut the arm off. A moment later, Kale could hear a quiet voice behind him. Young Master Nim, it is a cruel sight to look at. Are you feeling okay? Ron was the perpetrator. What a sly old man. This was why Kale was so confident today. He looked past the secret organization to the boundary of the elf village. A small defensive wall could be seen. Kale could also see Pendrick and the elves looking at them with blank expression. Kale gave the order while looking at the elves. We will first get to the boundary. Kale's body shot forward with the sound of the wind. Our first priority is to block them. The magic spearman shouted. The hundreds of soldiers and animals all charged toward Kale's group. Kale looked toward them and started to smile. The magic spearman flinched as they made eye contact. Kale then started to speak to the magic spearman. You think this fog is just for show? The fog surrounding Kale's body quickly started to spread. On and Hong had gotten much stronger than before. Meow. Meow. The chilling meowing of the kittens echoed in the valley. The white fog quickly turned red as Kale charged into the approaching enemies. However, Kale was not afraid at all. The enemies in the front started to grab their necks. Ugh. It was difficult to use deadly poison against a large number of enemies, however, it was possible to paralyze them. The ones who managed to approach Kale through the paralysis all lost their left arms. Young Master Nim, do not push yourself too hard as you run. I know. Ron was using a dagger in each hand to cut off the enemy's left arms without any hesitation. He was being nice by not killing them. Ron was currently using the left arm that Mary had made for him. The arm that seemed to be a bit gray had no issues keeping up with his right arm. A whirlwind started to form in Kale's hand. Remove the fog. The fog disappeared. Add poison to the whirlwind. The whirlwind turned red. A kitten who was dyed black jumped off a tree and landed on Kale's shoulder. It was Hong. Kale shot up 2 poisonous whirlwinds into the sky as he continued to charge forward. Ron kept up to protect Kale. Locke was not far behind them, growing with his fangs showing. Gerdash. Although Locke had not transformed into his berserk state, the animals that had lost their wills still flinched at his growl. Their instincts made them feel fear as it was the growl of the Wolf King's heir. Locke quickly caught up to Kale and asked. Young Master Nim, can we heal them? In that state, probably not. They can't return to normal. No. I understand. The way to save those animals was to quickly kill them and remove the tamer's control. If they just got rid of the tamer's influence, they would continue to go berserk while suffering from the dead mana. Kale peeked at Locke moving away before continuing to move forward. He could hear the magic spearman shouting from a distance. Where are these bastards always popping out from? The magic spearman clenched his teeth and started to shout. Beacrox started to attack him as he did that. Shut the hell up. I plan on using all of my white gloves today. Clang. Beacrox's longsword clashed against the magic spearman's spear. The magic spearman started to cast a spell with his other hand. Fireball. Bang. Shit. This is why I didn't want to come here. The magic spearman shouted like he was tired of this. His fireball was easily broken by Locke's punch. Locke's hand burned for a moment, but he ignored it. This was the wolves' style of fighting. They fought without thinking about defense. However, Locke's goal was not the magic spearman. He was aiming for the person the magic spearman was protecting. The magic spearman urgently shouted. Shit. Ajusi. Protect Ballad. Locke's sharp claws were aiming for the tamer. However, there was no one to block Locke. The middle-aged swordsman was currently in a fierce battle. Damn it, where did these bastards come from? Oh, looks like you still have energy to flap your mouth. Shall we raise it up a level? Choi Han leisurely continued to attack the swordsman. The swordsman's body started to become covered in injuries. However, Choi Han did not kill him and just looked around as he pushed the swordsman to his limit. Wow. However, the tamer was still laughing without worry. Locke's sharp claws instantly arrived in front of the tamer. Time to catch a wolf. The young boy's eyes instantly turned white. However, there was someone covering his eyes the moment it turned white. The wolves on our side all lost their wool once the young boy's eyes turned white. Pendrick had explained it in detail for them. Meow. Another kitten that was dyed black appeared. The kitten who was covering her usual silver color instantly landed around the tamer and covered the tamer's eyes with her fog. Ah! What is this? The tamer became anxious. Kale's first goal was to prevent any more animals from becoming tamed. Locke's claws headed toward the tamer's eyes that were covered by the fog. Clang! However, there was a small dagger that stopped Locke's claws. Suddenly, a mummy-like assassin wearing white appeared from the shadow of the grass. The dagger in the assassin's hand turned in an odd direction and aimed for the back of Locke's hand. I guess I need to cut your fingers off. The moment the assassin said that, he could see that Locke was smiling. Pendrick had said the following to Kale. It looks like there are two people protecting the tamer. However, right before Pendrick had climbed to the top of the mountain, Rayon had told Kale that the magic spearman had just arrived. In that case, who were the two that Pendrick had seen? Number 1. Dodge. A voice called out to the assassin. At the same time, the man named Number 1 twisted his body to the side after hearing a different, cold voice. You are going to cut off who's what? It was Choi Han. His sword cut through the assassin's side. Ugh. However, the assassin covered the tamer boy's neck with his arm and retreated to the back. Locke's claw only managed to scratch the boy's palm. Ow. Number 1, I'm hurt. I'm going to kill that wolf. The boy started to cry through the fog. Tisk. Locke clicked his tongue and carried on in his arms as he rushed toward the boundary of the elf village without looking back. The tamer started to shout. Kill those young mutts. An old man's voice echoed in the valley as the animal's eyes turned red. Choi Han immediately headed toward Beacrox. He was supposed to go to Kale, but he was worried that Beacrox would lose his rationality during the battle. Where are you going? Beacrox asked Choi Han with a stoic expression. Beacrox was weaker than the magic spearman. Choi Han, who had been worried about Beacrox for that reason, looked back and asked in shock. What is up with those gloves? I was annoyed. Beacrox, who had thrown a total of 8 gloves toward the magic spearman, was smiling. They stopped talking and chased after Kale, who had arrived at the boundary to the elf village. Thanks to Ron's guard and Han's poison, Kale had arrived at the wall in a straight line like he was running a 100m race. Pendrick, good to see you. Pendrick nodded his head with a blank expression. Yes, sir. Kale looked past Pendrick to see another familiar face. Good to see you again too. It was the middle-aged elf he had met in the inn, the guardian knight, Jeet. Jeet could not believe what he was seeing. Adult elves were strong because they could handle elementals. However, they were not at this level. This man had a sword master, a wolf beast person, a poisonous fog, and an assassin of unknown strength protecting him. Furthermore, the other swordsmen seemed to be as strong as Jeet as well. How could all these strong individuals show up together? They were all as strong as the royal knights. Jeet looked toward Kale Henitus, the man leading these experts, and barely managed to speak. Yes sir, it has been a while. He was still respectful toward Kale. Jeet asked his elemental as soon as he saw Kale. Is he a dragon? No, he's a human. However, the power of nature is strong in this one. He was not a dragon. However, Jeet had heard about this noble and the things he had done. Pendrick had explained it all to him. Pendrick also mentioned that this human had agreed to help them without asking for any compensation. Even though elves did not like humans, they liked lifeforms that were pure and had a sense of responsibility. Kale could see an old elf with white hair and beard walking toward them. It was the elf chief. However, unfortunately, he did not have time to greet him. Kale Nim, everyone has arrived. Kale saw that everyone had arrived and walked toward the front of the wall. Choi Han and Beacrox followed next to him. Kale was walking confidently like he was walking on the walls of the Henadus castle walls. These walls were too shabby to be called castle walls. He could see animals rushing toward him underneath. Kill them. No matter what, make sure to kill them first. How dare they do that to my precious baby skin? The tamer really was not a child. The old man's voice made Kale turn around. The 300 animals with bottles of dead mana rushed toward him like they had gone crazy. The elves and the materialized elementals all flinched. This was much worse than the attacks until now. Kale Nim, is this okay? Pendrick turned pale as he looked toward the liquid dead mana falling between the animals. The ground turned black as soon as the liquid landed on it. Pendrick could hear Kale's voice at that moment. I did this on purpose. Pendrick flinched and turned his head. Excuse me. Kale looked peaceful as he stood on the wall with the elf village behind him. He looked like he was the chief of the village. Kale stared at the fact that only the animals were attacking and started to speak. He's still cool-headed. The tamer had veins popping out of his forehead but did not make the soldiers become poisoned by the dead mana. The soldiers of the secret organization were all stationed behind the animals. And behind them, at the way back, was the tamer and the trio of protectors. Pendrick noticed this as well and his eyes turned cloudy as he started to frown. Are you trying to get rid of the animals and the dead mana first? The battle would be in their favor if Kale used that lava-like fire to burn the animals and the dead mana in the bottles around their necks. Rationality was telling Pendrick that this was the correct decision. The Guardian Knight and the other elves all kept their mouths shut as they looked toward Kale. This was the reason they had asked for Kale's assistance. Although they had lived with these animals in harmony, they had no choice. It was better to release them from this pain as quickly as possible. No. They could hear Kale's calm voice. Kale wanted to know the strength of the fire of destruction before using it in his own territory. He was curious to know about the strength of the true fire of destruction, and not the useless one the elf had gained in the novel. That was why he was going to go all out just once. Kale smiled at the elves and responded. I plan to attack them. Kale stretched his arm out. Boom. Boom. His heart was beating as a rose gold light appeared on his palm. The magic spearman flinched and started to shout. He suddenly had an ominous feeling. Everybody attack. Ajusi, number 1, the two of you attack too. You want us to go through the dead mana? The magic spearman started to frown at the middle-aged man's question. He then coldly gave an order. It's an order. The middle-aged man, the assassin, and the hesitating soldiers all bit down on their lips and started to charge toward Kale after hearing the magic spearman's order. Yes, kill them. Scratch up all of those bastards' faces. The tamer was shouting. It was at that moment. Rumble. The elves looked up at the sky. Rayon, who was in the sky, started to speak to Kale. Human. What is this? Is it okay for me to stay here? It was at that moment. Wow. Rayon was amazed. Shit. Blin dash dot. At the same time, the magic spearman started to scream, but his shout was drowned out. Boom. A red thunderbolt struck down from the sky. Everybody could see nothing but red for a moment. It was also so loud that their ears were ringing. Once that thunderbolt disappeared, they could all hear something. Kale hunched over and started to cough. Cough. Blood was coming out of Kale's mouth. Shit. They never said there was a recoil. The birth of a hero did not say that there was a recoil to this power. Kale then remembered what the owner of the ancient power had said. If it is you, if it is someone like you who can throw all this money away, you'll be able to overcome anything. Use it to melt anything in your way. You will survive through the pain. Damn it. Why couldn't he say it'll hurt? Kale had not paid much attention to what the owner of the ancient power had said. Kale covered his mouth with one hand. Drip. Drip. Blood continued to drip down. Kale. Kale could hear Rayon's voice in his head. He was in pain. He had never felt this much pain ever since he came over to this world. Ugh. The black blood continued to drip down through his fingers and onto the castle wall. He could not stand up straight, as he continued to spit out blood. Cough. Ca. Kale Nim. A hand quickly grabbed onto the hunched-over Kale. It was Choi Han. Choi Han subconsciously tried to stand Kale up after seeing Kale look like he was about to fall off the wall. However, there was someone preventing him from doing so. Stop. What is it? Choi Han and Ron made eye contact. Ron continued to speak with a cold expression on his face. However, the corners of his lips were pale. What will you do if the blood goes down the wrong pipe? Choi Han let go of Kale. At that moment, Choi Han could see a bloody hand grabbing his arm. It was Kale. Kale looked toward Choi Han and Ron with a pained expression. Hurry up and, ugh. This damn blood. Blood continued to fill his mouth, preventing him from speaking properly. Why is the blood not stopping? He was in so much pain after the fire thunderbolt had landed. However, he was no longer in pain after about a minute, as the vitality of the heart started to heal him. However, there were still two problems. First, he still continued to cough up blood, and second, so hungry. He was hungry and felt like he had used up all of the energy in his body. He felt like he had been starving for a few days. It was similar to the pain that Kim Rock-soo had felt prior to getting used to not having food for long periods of time. Choi Han, hurry and go. What are you saying, Kale Nim? We need to take care of your first. Go bring me some bread. I'm so hungry. That was what Kale was trying to say, but Choi Han's vicious gaze made him say something else. Go take care of the tamer. Hurry up. At that moment, Kale heard someone screaming. My skin. It was an old man's voice. He was certain that it was the tamer. However, Kale could not see what was going on, as he was hunched over and coughing up blood. But he could still hear the screams, as well as the scent of burnt flesh. However, Choi Han could see what was going on. The location that the red light had struck was burnt black with a large fire continuing to roar. He could not see any life forms above the fire. The range of the thunderbolt was very wide. The secret organization members who were in the rear were all gone without a trace. My baby soft skin. Oh. Choi Han's gaze turned cold. The tamer and magic spearmen must have succeeded in using blink, as they appeared from outside of the thunderbolt's range. But they seemed to still have been affected by it, as the magic spearman's brown hair was all burnt and his spear was gone. He also seemed to have gotten burnt on his right hand. Kill them all. It hurts, it fucking hurts. However, the magic spearman was not as hurt as the tamer. The blink must have gone wrong, as the tamer had a deep injury in his arm and his face was burnt. Choi Han remembered what Kale had said before they headed over to the elf village. I earned an ancient power and I want to try it out. So, everybody retreat to the back once we get to the wall. It was an amazing power. Even he could not create such damage with a single blow. That was why Choi Han understood why the elves were standing there with a blank expression. What are you doing? Hurry up and go. Choi Han turned his gaze after feeling a tug at his arm. He could see that Kale's gaze was still calm, even though he could not stop coughing up blood. His eyes seemed rational. He was telling Choi Han to go while coughing up blood. Hurry up and go. Are you going to let the animals continue to suffer like this? Kale was clenching onto Choi Han's arm with what seemed to be a lot of strength based on the veins on the back of his hand, but there was no power in the grasp. That made Choi Han's expression become even stiffer. He was like this in the capital too. Choi Han was thinking about how Kale always put himself in danger in order to save others. Kale always tried to do the difficult things himself, even if he would suffer in pain like this. Who cares if the power is strong when it causes this much pain? However, Choi Han understood Kale's feelings. At that moment, Choi Han heard Kale's voice in his ear. Only you can do it. Kale could see Choi Han removing his hand from his shoulder. Choi Han really was the only one who could do it. Kale thought about making Rayon do it, but Rayon was a bit odd right now. Rayon's voice was consistently echoing in Kale's mind. This. B. Blood. What is he trying to say? Rayon could not speak properly. Instead, he just continued to say that over and over. At that moment, Kale heard Choi Han's voice. I will come back soon. Choi Han did not wait for Kale's response before disappearing. Aya. Ugh. Kale soon heard a lot more screams. It was most likely Choi Han's work. Kale wiped off the blood in his hands and put some strength into his legs. He then quickly gave an order. Ron, dead mana. Yes, sir. Ron's left arm, which was made by the necromancer Mary, was able to collect dead mana because it was not alive. Kale was planning on selling this precious dead mana to the Dark Elves and the Crown Prince. I can't give up this free money. Kale hated working for free. Kale put in a lot of effort in turning his head. He was so hungry that even doing this was difficult right now. He could see Locke and the kittens. Go. Although it would be normal for them to flinch after hearing Kale's indifferent voice, Locke immediately jumped off the wall and started to run behind Choi Han. An and Hong, who had been in Locke's arms, headed toward Kale. Meow. Meow. They tried to rub their bodies on Kale's legs. However, Kale avoided them. He didn't want the black dye to come off their bodies. Kale tapped them with his now clean hand to urge them on. An and Hong meowed a few more times before revealing their fangs and following behind Locke. Kale watched them leave before he slowly raised himself up. He could finally see the bottom of the wall. Kale flinched, and his sight became blurry for a moment. Whether it was because he had spent all of his energy or because the sight in front of him was shocking, Kale staggered to the side. Was the fire of destruction this strong? He could see the fire on top of the scorched ground. The results of using the fire of destruction at full power was beyond what Kale had expected. Kale started to think as he staggered. This is pretty good. It was worth the 200,000 silver coins. However, contrary to his satisfaction, Kale could not put any strength in his body. He did not even have the power to stop himself from falling backward. Young Master Nim. Shit. Pendrick and Beacrox reached their arms out to catch him. However, Kale did not fall, even though they did not manage to reach him. No. Kale. You cannot fall down. Kale could feel a head supporting his back. It was the black dragon, Rayon. He could feel Rayon's round head on his back as his back started to get wet. Rayon seemed to be crying. Kale started to frown. This is bad. The dragon had descended. Kale looked toward the elves behind Pendrick. They were all still blankly staring below the wall. However, two elves, the guardian knight and the chief, who had come much closer, slowly turned toward Kale. At the same time, the elementals next to the two elves, a half-transparent blue elemental and a white elemental, both started to shake in fear. Kale Nim, are you okay? Pendrick's hand was covered in a white light. It was his healing power. Pendrick's hand immediately headed for Kale's back, but it ran into something invisible. What the? Pendrick mumbled in shock. Just a dragon's body. Kale started to speak to Pendrick in order to divert his attention. Kale was not bleeding like before, but a small amount of blood was still seeping out of the corner of his mouth. Once we get rid of the tamer, I think it will be better for the elves to take care of the animals. They have lived with all of you for a long time. Pendrick stopped moving. He looked toward Kale and was at a loss for words after seeing Kale's calm demeanor. He finally understood why Kale had not used that red thunderbolt, the power that he needed to sacrifice his own strength to cast, on the animals. He was feeling sorry for the animals. He had proceeded with this difficult and painful method so that the elves, who had been living in harmony with the animals for a long time, could peacefully say goodbye to them. Kale ignored Pendrick's gaze and started to think about how he had to do all this even though he was starving. Kale looked back down at the bottom of the wall. Ha. Pendrick could see Kale let out a sigh-like laugh as he looked at the battlefield. I picked a difficult path. Choi Han and the rest were fighting very well. Kale could see Choi Han's black aura cut through the tamer's stomach. Blood. Brown. Come protect me. Shit. Bang. Choi Han nimbly dodged the magic spearman's sword. The magic spearman had taken a sword from one of his subordinates in order to be able to attack, as his spear had been destroyed by Kale's thunderbolt. I'm already busy because of those blonde twins. Why are these bastards always getting in my way? The magic spearman swung his sword in a way that looked like he wanted to vent his frustration. However, his attacks did not manage to land on Choi Han. Kale looked away from the indifferent Choi Han to see the others, who were also fighting. With him not there, Locke, the kittens, and even Ron were like fish in water. Actually, vicious might be a better word to describe it. All of them were fighting without holding back. The battlefield was filled with blood. Kale got scared at the sight and repented. I stepped in for nothing. Yes, there was no need for him to do that. He chose the difficult path for no reason. Looking at his present situation after stepping up to test the power of the fire of destruction, Kale regretted his actions. All he had to do was use these experts under his command. Kale found it difficult to even stand there without any strength. He wanted to go to sleep. Although he was not in pain, he really wanted to eat. This was the first time he felt like he was going to faint after receiving the vitality of the heart. Pendrick, who had misunderstood Kale's bitter smile for a different reason, hesitated multiple times with a complicated expression on his face before finally starting to speak. We will never forget your and everyone else's benevolence, young Master Nim. However, Kale could not respond to Pendrick's statement. You crazy bastards. Beecrox, who had approached Kale, shouted loudly as he swung his long sword. Kale, who quickly turned around, could see a white bandage in front of him. It was the assassin, number 1. He seemed to have run forward without looking back while the red thunderbolt struck down. He was so stealthy that he managed to get by Beecrox without getting noticed. Kale made eye contact with the eyes visible underneath the bandage. At that moment, he heard an angry voice in his head. The voice sounded like it had been crying. I'm going to kill him. With that, the white bandage flew backward. Kale blankly stared at the individual that got thrown back without even touching him. Beecrox did not need to swing his long sword. Rayon had used his strength. The white bandage that was floating in the air tried to move in fear, but he could not do anything. What is this? You're a mage. Kale thought about his answer, but did not say it out loud. No, a dragon. A vicious voice continued to speak in his head. I will never forgive any of them. Kale wondered who the them Rayon was talking about was. Human, I will not appear, just like you asked. However, in return, do not look. It will be difficult for a weakling like you to watch. Kale happily did as Rayon asked. He made sure to say something, just in case Rayon went crazy. Okay, I'm going to take a nap. Kale closed his eyes. He didn't have any strength to even keep his eyes open anymore. Kale felt the round reptile head and paws supporting his body as he fell asleep. Aya. A pitiful scream echoed in the valley. Bang. It sounded like something blew up. In fact, it sounded like a human body blew up. Kale debated whether he should open his eyes and watch. However, he had given them orders prior to their arrival at the elf village. With the victory in their grasps, he knew that these people, who were all stronger than him, would take care of everything. A great and mighty being's protection. Kale lost consciousness after hearing this new voice. He felt like his body was slowly being laid down as he prayed. He prayed that he could have at least one slice of bread when he woke up. However, when Kale woke up, he was laying in an extremely beautiful, almost to the point of overwhelming, flower garden. There was even a weird leaf crown on his head. It was a crown made from the world tree's leaves. Kale was nervous at what might be going on. Kale felt like he was coming out of a swamp as he came back to his senses. He tried to recall what had happened. I fainted. He had no strength left and fainted. Kale realized that it was time for him to open his eyes. It was because he could hear a voice in his head. 3, 2, 1. Half of half, human, I will count back down from 100. Wake up before I reach 0, or I will destroy this continent. 199-98. Kale heard Rayon's voice and immediately opened his eyes. He was shocked at what he saw. A flower garden. There were flower petals floating in the air. Rayon's voice could be heard by his ear. N95. The voice that was as quiet as a whisper seemed to be shocked. Kale lowered his head. The voice had come from on top of his stomach. He raised his hand to feel something invisible on his stomach. It was Rayon. Has he been here the whole time? Kale got scared thinking about how this black dragon would have been reciting his countdown the entire time. Kale felt the naturally cold reptilian skin as he patted Rayon's back. Other people would think that he was patting thin air. He then turned his gaze. Why did the first face he saw have to be Ron's? Ron, whose benign smile was missing, looked stiff as he stopped what he was doing and focused on Kale. What Ron was doing made Kale become scared. Why is he sharpening his blade? Ron was sharpening his dagger at the boundaries of the flower garden. He seemed to have removed all of the blood off the dagger, as it was shining under the blue sky. Kale felt like just touching it would cut his skin. Kale blankly stared until he turned his gaze after hearing Rayon's voice. Human. Why did you faint for 3 days? I can make hundreds of thunderbolts like that. Do not do that ever again. Weaklings should live like weaklings. 3 days. I fainted for 3 days. Me. Kale Nim. He woke up. He finally woke up. Me-yo. Kale could see Choi Han, Hong, and the rest of the group all running toward him. Kale started to frown as soon as he saw them. Why are they still in a mess? Rayon had said that it had been 3 days. Kale looked at Choi Han and Locke, who were still wearing the black outfits and looked like they did not even clean the dry blood off of their bodies. He then looked down at himself and was relieved. Although he was wearing the black outfit as well, there was no blood or dirt on him. I cleaned you up with my magic. I am a clean dragon. Rayon really was the best. Kale could see that even An and Hong still had the black dye on their bodies. However, he did not get up, as it was annoying to even get up. Finally. You finally woke up. Choi Han spoke on behalf of everyone. His voice was a mix of relief and admiration. For the past 3 days, Choi Han and the rest stayed by his side without leaving. The elves had told them that this was a safe location and to trust them, however, neither Choi Han nor the rest could trust them easily. After all of them had grown up with some sort of trust issue. Choi Han made eye contact with Kale. Kale's gaze seemed to be asking where they were located. That was correct. Kale definitely had that on his mind as he looked at Choi Han. Why am I here looking like this? Choi Han started to speak in order to answer Kale's question. This is said to be the place with the strongest amount of life force and natural power. The elves told us this was the best place for recovery. Kale quickly understood that this was the elf village's flower garden that was described in the novel. The branch of the world tree was nearby this flower garden. Kale moved his still weak hand to touch his head. He was curious about what was on his head. It seemed to be a crown made of the world tree's leaves. Kale started to smile once he felt the leaves on his head. They're giving me the best possible treatment. The elves had provided a human a crown made of the world tree's leaves and placed them at the location closest to the branch of the world tree. This was beyond the treatment they would give him for helping them. There was only one answer. Kale remembered the shocked voice he heard right before he fainted. A great and mighty being's protection. The chief of the elf village seemed to have realized the existence of a dragon. The problem was whether it was just her that knew of Rayon or if everyone else knew as well. Kale pointed to his stomach. Choi Han avoided Kale's gaze. Kale started to frown. Choi Han started to touch the flowers in the garden as he quickly said in a quiet voice so that nobody else could hear. Ahem, nobody has seen Rayon, but the chief and the guardian knight know about that existence being nearby. Kale asked Choi Han with his gaze. Just the two of them. Choi Han, who peeked over at Kale, turned his gaze away again as he answered. The others probably suspect it. Kale could hear Rayon mumbling in his head. I never showed myself. I kept my promise. I quietly stayed next to you, human. I even ignored the chief when she tried to talk to me. It had been 3 days. He had been out for too long. He had no idea what these fools may have done while he was out. Kale looked past Choi Han, who wouldn't make eye contact with him, and took the time to look at each person, starting with An and Hong, then Locke and Beecrox, and finally ending with Ron. Young Master Nim, do you have the strength to speak? The group all looked toward Kale at Ron's question. He had fainted after coughing up blood. They knew that Kale was a good person who really liked to help others, but they also knew that Kale did not enjoy moving around and getting hurt. 1. That Kale had used so much strength that he fainted. They were all so shocked that their minds went blank. They focused on Kale's lips, that were slowly starting to open. It was his usual indifferent voice that sounded very cold. Nobody got hurt. Ron slowly started to smile. An and Hong meowed as they started to rub their faces on Kale's body. All of the black dye on their bodies seemed like it would end up on Kale's outfit. Yes, sir. Nobody got hurt. You do not need to worry, young Master Nim. Worry. Kale answered with shock. It's only natural. The enemy would need strength at the level of the whale royalty for Choi Han to get hurt. It was only natural for them to not get hurt. Kale started to get annoyed while looking at Choi Han, who was smirking. He was also annoyed while looking at Beecrox, who was slowly removing his bloodied white gloves, as well as Ron, who was pretending to be a benign old man again. Ahem. Kale looked back toward Choi Han after hearing his fake cough. He needed to get up. He felt like he had recovered enough strength, however, this flower garden was softer than he expected. Kale Nim. Choi Han let out a fake cough before starting to speak. He needed to report the results of the battle from 3 days ago to Kale. They had taken care of things properly, but they may have gone a bit overboard. Everybody turned away so as to not make eye contact with Kale. All of the enemies retreated after the battle 3 days ago. Number 1, the assassin, is dead, while the magic spearman will not be able to move his lower body in the future. As for the tamer, Choi Han could see Kale's palm in front of his face. Choi Han stopped talking at this gesture that was telling him to stop talking and look toward Kale. Kale's face seemed healthy, but tired. I'm hungry. Excuse me. Meat. Huh. He was looking for meat in the elf village, which only had vegetables. He had hoped for a piece of bread before he fainted, but now, he felt like he needed some meat. His strength had recovered, but the starving feeling had not disappeared. Kale confidently responded back to the confused Choi Han. His voice was cracking after not being used for a few days. Tell them to bring out some meat. Beecrox stood up at that moment. I will go get some for you. As expected of the chef. Beecrox seemed reliable to Kale for the first time. Kale watched Beecrox put on a new pair of gloves and heading away to cook before Kale slowly lifted his body up. Plop. The crown of leaves fell onto his thighs. The crown that was made of the world tree's leaves was now green, just like normal leaves. If there was a color to describe the color of an aurora, this would be it. Kale felt iffy while thinking about how he had been laying here while wearing this fancy and holy-looking crown of leaves for the past 3 days. That was why he picked the crown up with only 2 fingers as he looked toward the entrance of the flower garden. Originally, nobody had been there. However, a group of people arrived right as Beecrox left. Kale looked toward them and started to speak. I wish to lay down on a bed. The elf in front of the group was the elf chief Canaria, who was a recurring character in the novel alongside Pendrick. Her white hair was combed up tidily and a smile was on her wrinkly old face as she bowed. I will provide a house fitting for our esteemed guest who has received the protection of a great and mighty being. It was an extremely respectful demeanor. Choi Han had seen this for the past 3 days, but he still felt a bit overwhelmed by this extremely respectful demeanor. Although they had helped the elves, this level of respect seemed to be beyond what they deserved. He subconsciously started to frown as he looked toward Kale. He knew that Kale did not like this kind of demeanor, even at the palace. However, Choi Han could only keep his mouth shut at Kale's corresponding actions. Sure. He was twirling the crown in his hand as he casually answered like it was natural. Lead the way. People might even think that Kale was a dragon. Kale didn't care about this as he accepted the situation as is. However, he felt a bit awkward after seeing the house. Here it is. It was a house made by carving a hole in the largest tree in the elf village. The house inside of the large tree was magical. Kale looked toward Chief Canaria. It is my house. The chief had given him her house. This was the best house in the entire village. Kale flinched for a moment before confidently starting to speak. May I go in? There was no reason to reject such a good house. Kale, who sat down on a soft couch made of leaves, heard the rest of the story about what had happened in the last 3 days while he ate bread. Kale picked up the glass of fruit juice that Ron handed him while he observed Choi Han, Canaria, Jeet, and Pendrick, who were all sitting in front of him. The tamer lost his eyes and fainted before teleporting away with the magic spearman. Kale had repeated the results of the battle. The magic spearman lost his spear and injured his legs, so it is expected that he will not be able to use his lower body in the future. Only the two of them managed to run away, while the middle-aged swordsman and a few of the organization's members are imprisoned. As for the rest, they were dead. The animals were dead as well. Kale made eye contact with Chief Canaria. She had a wise gaze that only someone who had lived for many years could have. He then started to speak again. Then we can leave now. With everything settled, they did not need to be here any longer. Pendrick flinched and started to speak. We need to reward ... Kale's group had gone above and beyond what the elves had originally expected. However, Pendrick could see Kale raise his hand to stop him. No need. The elves will have enough issues restoring the village and the boundaries, so how could I ask for anything? I am happy enough that none of my group got hurt. Pendrick's pupils started to shake. He had felt it last time as well, but how could there be such a good person? He had heard that nobles were greedy and seeked power, but all of that information seemed to be wrong. At that moment, Pendrick could hear the chief starting to speak. I can see why you have a dragon's protection. Pendrick flinched. As he had expected, the great and mighty being was a dragon. The chief and guardian knight had not said a single thing to the suspecting elves. Everything seemed to make sense after hearing what the chief just said. That overwhelming natural power that destroyed the enemies belonged to a dragon. Although gods existed, elves believed that dragons were gods that lived in the world with them. Kale was a person protected by a being that was a god of all living creatures. I'm sure that there is a reason Dragon Nim is roaming by your side without revealing themselves. Chief Canaria was observing Kale. The dragon was hiding his identity, but had revealed his powers. Someone like her, who had lived for a long time, naturally understood the dragon's intent. He doesn't want us to worship him. However, he probably wants us to treat his person like we would treat him. She had been iffy at first when Pendrick had said that a human was coming to help them. However, if it was someone who had the love and protection of a dragon, especially a person like Kale, who had protected the elves and the world tree to the point that he coughed up blood. We can do that. She slowly started to speak. As someone who has Dragon Nim's protection, I believe you have the qualifications to hear everything. Qualifications. Kale started to frown. He had a bad feeling about this. All he wanted to do was take as much as he could from the elf village before he left. Kale urgently started to speak. Hold ... They seemed to be looking for the world tree. He had heard something useless before he could even shout, hold on. Kale's pupils started to shake. An odd smile was on Chief Canaria's face as she noticed Kale's reaction. The location of the world tree is not known. There are almost no humans who know about it. However, Kale did know the location. The world tree was in the last of the 5 forbidden regions, the Valley of Despair. Only a few elves knew about this location. It is not a place people need to know about. Kale pretended like he didn't know the location. He also did not want to find out through the elf chief. However, the chief must have misunderstood, as she started to smile. You are right. However, greedy humans always want to know the location. Like that organization this time. However, there are bound to be the opposite kind of people as well. She felt like this benevolent man who was willing to sacrifice himself without desiring any profits in return should know everything. Furthermore, he had a dragon next to him. The fact that a dragon, a race known for their selfishness, was willing to use their power for someone else meant that this human was the first of his kind. He would be a hero who would be talked about for ages. There was a reason that the human heroes in the ancient legends always had a guardian dragon with them. Sadly, humans had forgotten about these ancient legends. Dragons tended to only help out talented humans with strong wills. Although this time, it seems like the dragon has picked a weakling. But he is someone who has had many fortuitous encounters in order to gain multiple ancient powers. There will be no one as lucky as him in the future. The chief quickly got to the point. That is why we plan on sending Pendrick to Sir Gold Dragon Nim to handle the situation. The defense around the World Tree is currently controlled with his magic. Kale flinched. What did she just say? Gold Dragon. Rayon showed a similar response. This was different than with the Dark Elf Mayor. Chief Canaria seemed to know the location of another dragon. I want to feign ignorance. Naturally, Kale did not want to know the location of the other dragon, especially since it was related to the World Tree. Of course, nothing big would happen if the World Tree was to disappear from the Western continent. Human. I am curious. However, Rayon was curious. Ask her. I am curious about the dragon. Why did this dragon show such curiosity for another dragon? Their race was known for only liking themselves. Kale hesitated for a long time before finally asking. Where will Pendrick be going? He did not directly ask the location of the dragon's lair. Kale was hoping that the chief would avoid answering the question by saying that it was none of his business. However, the chief immediately answered. He is in the Whipper Kingdom. Kale's shoulders flinched as Rayon started to shout in his mind. Human. Don't we need to go sell the thing to that idiot? We also have to go destroy the magic tower. Rayon was right. They needed to meet with Watira and then head to the Whipper Kingdom to meet Tunka. There were benefits to be had in a magic tower to be blown up. Oh. Rayon was excited. What did I get myself into? That was the only thought on Kale's mind. It was another dragon aside from Rayon. Kale did not want to meet another dragon. In most fantasy novels, old dragons were characters that served as helpers who would give the MC the key for a critical point in the novel. However, the dragons in The Birth of a Hero were all just egotistical and arrogant beings. Didn't the novel say that all of the dragons here were very selfish? Rayon was an exception. Kale started to frown as he started to worry. I know there are no dragons as great and mighty as I am in this world, but I am curious. Everybody has other members of their race, except me. Rayon saying, except me, made Kale flinch. Well, you are one of a kind as well. There is nobody else as weak as you. That is okay. I will be with you. Hoa. A deep sigh came out of Kale's mouth. He brushed his face with his hands as he continued to think. Why did things end up like this? He had done things according to the plan, so why did all these other things keep getting in his way? Was it because he had both a dragon and the MC, Choi Han, with him? Rayon's worried voice went off in Kale's head. Human, are you sick again? HAAA. Kale covered his face with both hands as he asked the elf chief. Can you tell us the location? Oh yeah. Chief Canaria started to smile at Kale's question. She seemed like a fan who was about to watch her two favorite celebrities meet each other. Kale started to feel iffy after lowering his hand to see the smile on Canaria's face. Does the dragon have a good personality? I do not dare to speak on the personalities of such revered beings. They are all great and mighty beings. Kale shouldn't have asked such a question to dragon worshippers. Is it an adult dragon? He is an ancient dragon Nim. He is also a sociable dragon. An old dragon. Rayon added on after hearing Canaria say that the dragon was an ancient dragon. On the other hand, Kale's expression did not seem to be too good. A sociable dragon is still a selfish dragon. But Kale was still a bit relieved. Chief Canaria's words meant that the gold dragon would at least show some curiosity toward Rayon. I will prove the greatness of Rayon Miru. Kale held back a sigh after hearing Rayon's response. Would a goofy dragon like Rayon manage to survive in front of an ancient dragon? He was actually a bit worried. However, that worry quickly disappeared. It was because of what Chief Canaria said next. However, I am worried because, as an ancient dragon, the dragon Nim is struggling with his health. I hope that seeing another dragon Nim will make him happy and help him recover some strength. Thankfully, that dragon was weak. This lessened Kale's worries, because he felt like they would be able to run away, even if Rayon ended up in a fight with this gold dragon. We can run if all else fails. Rayon should not be at a disadvantage if he took Choi Han and the rest with them. Kale debated what he could do to be able to take a strong enough group to be able to look down on that ancient dragon. However, Canaria started to smile and speak again. I believe it would be a beautiful sight when the two dragon Nims meet. Beautiful. Kale was worried that blood would be shed. However, an even greater concern arose. The guardian knight motioned to the chief with his eyes. Canaria's expression stiffened a bit after seeing his gaze. She then turned to make eye contact with Kale. Young Master Nim, is it possible? Canaria said a collection of words that made Kale have a bad feeling. Kale picked up another piece of bread and started to eat again. Could you meet with the swordsman? You damn elves. Kale took another bite of the bread and swallowed the things he wanted to say to the elves as well. These elves didn't give him anything but continued to ask him for stuff. Even if Kale kept saying he didn't need anything, isn't it only proper to bring something over when asking for something? They were like this in the novel too. This chief put Choi Han to work quite a bit. Kale thought that the chief was like a raccoon. She didn't give any rewards while saying that materialistic greed was bad, but still asked for a lot of help. Naturally, Kale had no plan on being swindled by Canaria. Kale looked toward Canaria with an indifferent expression. Why do I need to meet him? Canaria cautiously started to speak after seeing Kale's indifferent expression and hearing his cold voice. She had never been this cautious around a human before. However, he was someone who was protected by a dragon. That great and mighty dragon was probably nearby watching them right now. The swordsman would not say anything, no matter how much we interrogate him. You mentioned that you do not know their identity, but we thought you might be able to get more information out of him since you have dealt with them 3 times already. Canaria could see Kale chewing on the bread while he observed her. This noble who was eating the bread gracefully finished the piece of bread before starting to smile. It was similar to her own smile. I will help you only up to this request, since it is for everyone's benefit. Canaria's expression became odd. However, Kale did not show any reactions to her expression. Instead, he looked toward the others as he continued to speak. Pendrick, don't you agree? We need to help each other out so everyone can live well. As long as it is within our abilities. You are right, young Master Nim. Yes. Helping each other without any materialistic gain in mind is indeed very cool. You agree with us too, right, Guardian Knight Nim? The Guardian Knight flinched at Kale's sudden question before fixing his posture and responding. Ahem, yes indeed. I've never met a young Master Nim, another human, who knows the value of such deeds. You definitely deserve the protection of a dragon Nim. Indeed. Like you mentioned, Guardian Knight Nim, such deeds can only be repaid with action. Contrary to Kale's gentle demeanor, his word choice was very specific. However, his gentle smile made the 2 elves only hear what they thought to be the words of a benevolent person. Pendrick loudly responded back. You are right. The heart cannot be filled with materialistic things. Pendrick was showing the type of reaction Kale wanted. Good, good. So next time, you will all need to give it your all to help me out. Instead of sharing his inner thoughts, Kale looked toward the chief and put on a smile that seemed even more benevolent than the chief's smile. There was nothing in the elf village to take other than their manual labor. Putting the elves to work also meant that he would be getting the elementals to work as well. Shouldn't he put them to use since he helped them out? Furthermore, the elf village was at a great location between the Roan Kingdom and the Breck Kingdom. Human, why are you smiling like you smile around the crown prince? Did they do something wrong? Instead of responding to Rayon's words, Kale stood up from his seat. Let us go right away. Kale and the chief made eye contact. Shouldn't we do our best to help as quickly as possible if there is a need? The chief's expression turned odd again. It was as if this human in front of her was pressuring her to do as he said. She could also feel the source of the pressure as well. What a unique ancient power. This unknown ancient power was pressuring her. She found Kale to be interesting. He had unparalleled luck, a unique ancient power, and his speech is eloquent as well. Canaria got up as Kale had done. She could see curiosity in the eyes of Pendrick and the Guardian Knight as they looked at Kale. The other elves would probably have similar expressions on their faces. This was an interesting human. She wondered what he was trying to do by getting the elves' curiosities. She was curious as well, but she could not continue to stay by Kale's side. Unfortunately, I need to return to the restoration site, so Pendrick will guide you there. I see. Kale made eye contact with Pendrick. Shall we go? Yes, sir. Pendrick took the lead and opened the door. Kale, as well as the rest of the group, started to move. However, Kale soon stopped walking. Ah. What is it, young Master Nim? Kale rummaged through his magic bag as he responded. Everybody, masks on. The mask that Kale had taken off to eat had returned. The group let out a collective sigh before taking out their masks as well. Kale gave them a few commands once everybody had their masks on. Pendrick blankly watched before flinching at what Kale was telling the group to do, but soon started to walk at Kale's urging. We can go. Yes, yes, sir. Kale followed Pendrick to the back of the chief's residence. They were heading in the opposite direction of the flower garden from earlier. A large boulder soon appeared, and Kale's expression turned odd after entering the underground room underneath the boulder. This location had never been described in the novel. Kale had thought that the elves had done some simple interrogations after imprisoning the swordsman from the secret organization. This is not what I had expected. The underground room in front of Kale was dyed with blood. It seemed more proper to call this an underground prison. Kale did not know that the elves would torture the swordsman. Kale reaffirmed his belief that stereotypes were useless before he pointed with his chin as he looked at Pendrick. How can we chat when he is like that? That. Pendrick was at a loss for words as he started to smile awkwardly. The elves guarding the underground prison smiled awkwardly as well. Kale could see that the middle-aged swordsman was almost unrecognizable as he sat there with his legs twisted and his body covered in blood. Choi Han said that he paralyzed him. Kale peeked toward the elf with the torturing tools and mumbled as he crouched down. Elves and humans, they're all the same. Pendrick flinched at Kale's words. The words from this person who had no greed and simply moved to save everyone felt cold and sharp. Pendrick, can you send the other elves out? You can stay. I want to chat in peace. Yes, sir. I understand. Pendrick motioned to the guards, who soon exited the room. Kale was looking at the bloodied man while Pendrick did that. He had been with the tamer and the magic spearman. This swordsman had seemed pretty talented for his age. Do you know his name? No, he has not said anything. Pendrick mumbled as he answered. Kale found it odd that a healer like Pendrick could calmly stand in this prison as he turned his gaze back to the middle-aged swordsman. It was at that moment. Kee-hee-hee. The swordsman suddenly started to laugh. It was a fairly creepy laughter. However, Kale looked toward him and spoke with indifference. I'm glad that you are not pretending to be asleep. Beecrox chimed in at that moment. His name is Balbud. Balbud, the middle-aged swordsman, instantly stopped laughing. Kale turned toward Beecrox and flinched. Beecrox had put on a new pair of white gloves at some point and was holding a sharp dagger in his hand. Beecrox misunderstood Kale's shocked expression and explained himself. That was what the magic spearman called him during the battle. He seems to have been responsible for protecting the tamer. However, based on how similar his name is to the tamer's name, he just seems like a dispensable tool. Kee-hee-hee. The swordsman started to laugh as soon as Beecrox finished speaking. However, he still did not say anything. Kale's voice reached the swordsman, Balbud, who was looking down at the ground. You're not going to say anything. However, Balbud started to speak, contrary to Kale's expectations. Just. Balbud slowly raised his head. He didn't care about the elves. However, he was curious about these people. They still had those masks and annoying fake uniforms on, as if they were making fun of him. Just who the hell are you? Who dares to go against us? Balbud started to grind his teeth. He had never seen such experts before. That was why it felt so unfair. He wanted to know who they were before he died. However, Balbud could see Kale smiling behind the mask. This was the person who had fainted after launching the red thunderbolt. He believed this man was the leader. That man said a single word. Arm. Balbud's eyes opened wide. He tried to move his head back down to avoid Kale's gaze, however, there was a hand that pulled on his hair. It was not Kale but Beacrox, whose white gloves were quickly being stained red by the blood on Balbud's hair. With his head being held in place, Balbud had no choice but to look at Kale. Kale slowly asked before Balbud managed to close his eyes. I guess the Eastern continent was not enough. Kale could see the anxiety in Balbud's face. What the hell are you? Sun God. However, Kale just continued to say what he wanted to say. He decided to ask all of the questions he had while he had the chance. Roan, Wolf Tribe, Mermaids, and the Empire. The mermaids were probably for the sea routes, but why did you aim for the Roan Kingdom and the Empire? Kale made eye contact with Balbud, who had seemed anxious ever since he brought up the Eastern continent. Balbud started to frown. He had no idea who this person was nor how he knew about Arm, the Eastern continent, as well as their actions on the Western continent. He lightly bit down on his lips as his eyes became cloudy and he started to smile. Hee, you think I would tell you anything? Balbud moved his tongue to find a bitter taste deep in his mouth. His heart would stop moving the moment he burst this capsule. Balbud started to laugh while thinking about how he would kill himself without revealing anything. He provoked Kale with his fiery gaze as he tried to bite down on the small capsule in his mouth. I will never tell you, ugh. The middle-aged swordsman Balbud suddenly grunted. He could see the eyes behind the mask turning into crescents. You're looking down on me too much if you think that such a method would work. Meow. The red kitten removed his stealth and slowly appeared in front of everyone. On and Hong were, naturally, with Kale. Balbud, who couldn't look down because Beacrox was holding his head up, could not see the fog surrounding his legs. They were using a paralyzing poison. Ugh, cough. Balbud's body was shaking as a white glove went into his mouth and pulled out the small capsule. That is a magic device. I will analyze it. Kale turned his gaze back toward Balbud after seeing Beacrox cleaning his white glove and putting the small capsule away. He smiled while looking at Balbud, who was slowly losing consciousness from the paralyzing poison. You can't expect me to fall for such a common pattern. Kale had read many novels about how the MC could not gain any information from the enemies they captured because the enemy would use poison or a hidden device to kill themselves. As he was not the MC of a story, Kale did not want to suffer such a disappointing loss of information. He got up after seeing that Balbud finally lost his consciousness and gently started to speak to Pendrick, who was looking at him. All lives are precious. Isn't it great we saved him before he died? Pendrick suddenly forgot what he was going to say. Did you decide what you will do with Balbud? That. Difficult to decide. Pendrick nodded his head. The elven philosophy dictated that they should execute Balbud and the rest of the prisoners. However, it would be disappointing to execute them right away without gathering any information from them beforehand. I would like to make a suggestion. A suggestion. Kale started to smile toward Pendrick, who was confused but also had some expectations toward what Kale would say. Pendrick would definitely remember how Kale mentioned Arm and the Eastern continent. Since this was new information that Kale did not share in front of the chief, Pendrick would want to gather more information like this, if possible. There are no other races like the elves that are so thorough with getting revenge. The elves considered them to be an elegant race that was better than other races. That was the reason they were not materialistic. They believed that living in nature without materialistic greed made them better than other races, like the humans. Maybe that was why, but the elves were thorough with making sure to get revenge on any enemies that choose to provoke them. In this aspect, the elves probably resembled dragons more than the dark elves. After all, the dragons were an even more arrogant race than the elves. Kale turned his gaze toward Balbud. Beacrox was thoroughly tightening the chains on his arms and legs. What about passing Balbud off to someone else? Pendrick's expression became odd. This did not seem to be the result he had wanted. Do you mean pass him off to you, young Master Nim? The elves knew they had already asked a lot of Kale, but they were hoping that Kale would step in. The elf village currently did not have enough elementals to even restore the valley. Furthermore, they needed to be prepared in case the organization came back to attack again. Although they were lacking manpower, they also wanted to get their revenge. Pendrick held back his expectations and waited for Kale's response. He thought it would be good if Kale stepped in. You could not find such a righteous person anywhere in the world. No. Excuse me. However, a completely unexpected answer came out of Kale's mouth. If he was not going to take Balbud, who would? The confusion was clearly visible on Pendrick's face. I want you to first discuss my suggestion with the chief Nim. I will give you the details if you all decide to go along with my suggestion. Will it be with a trustworthy person? Pendrick could see Kale nod his head without any hesitation. Yes, it is a trustworthy person. It was because Kale had the person's weakness in his hands. Kale recalled the video communication device that was stuck deep inside his magic bag. He had not had to think about it for a while. He was annoyed with the secret organization and hated them. However, he did not want to step up to deal with them. It was obvious that doing so would lead to a lot of headaches. So, think about it and give me an answer by this evening. I will be leaving tomorrow because there are things I still need to do. Pendrick observed Kale's back as Kale started to walk away after patting him on the shoulder. If it is someone such a righteous person can trust, wouldn't it be okay? He could not be certain about it, but Pendrick felt like he could trust Kale because Kale had stepped up once again for a situation where he had nothing to gain. Oh, one more thing. Yes. Kale turned back around and started to speak. Are you going to the Whipper Kingdom alone? Yes sir. I believe that will be the case. Then let's go together. Excuse me. Kale gently smiled toward Pendrick. He thought that it would be better to have an elf from the elf village who had a connection with the gold dragon when they went to meet him. If possible, he wanted to take everyone that he could. Of course, he would be in the way back of their group, maybe even hiding behind Choi Han. The Whipper Kingdom is currently a dangerous place to move around alone. You'll be safe if you go with us. We have things to do there anyway. The current Whipper Kingdom was a mess. The Whipper Kingdom has been on a one-way train to hell ever since Tunka became the commander-in-chief last fall. Of course, none of the Whipper Kingdom's residents knew that they were headed for despair. Kale looked toward Pendrick, who had an apologetic look on his face. I can't burden you so much. No such thing. Stop thinking about such useless things. It'll probably be better so that you know where the prisoner ends up as well. Just think about it. Thank you very much. No need to thank me. Shouldn't we all help each other out? Pendrick started to smile. It looked even purer and brighter because his face was so handsome. Of course, Kale was paying more attention to Beacrox, who was looking at him with an iffy look on his face. You are right. Young Master Nim, you are definitely right. Yes, everything I say is right. Kale played along with Pendrick using a joking tone before heading out of the underground prison. He could hear Pendrick speaking to him as he walked. I will discuss it with the chief as quickly as possible. That was exactly what Kale wanted. Kale started to walk faster. There was someone he needed to discuss this with as well. To be more specific, he needed to tell the person he planned on dumping Balbud on. Kale, who returned to the chief's house, immediately ordered Rayon to check the surroundings. There were no bugs nor recording magic in the house, probably because they knew that Kale was with a dragon. Kale walked into the guest room that the chief had created for him and had his group guard the door. Rayon. All right, human. Rayon revealed himself in the air. Kale put the video communication device on the table and sat down on the couch. Rayon started to connect the video communication device at Kale's signal. A person's face appeared on the device after a moment. Long time no see. It was Crown Prince Alberu. Alberu's eyes showed just the slightest bit of happiness to see Kale. Your Highness, you still remain the vibrant star in the hearts of the citizens. However, Alberu immediately started to frown after hearing Kale's greeting. What do you want from me now? You really understand me now? I am filled with Admi --. Enough. Kale closed his mouth and started to smile. Alberu started to frown, as if he found Kale's smile to be disgusting. The two of them had not seen each other for about 3 months. They had nothing to discuss with each other since they chatted about the Whipper Kingdom 3 months ago. "Are you contacting me about traveling to the Whipper Kingdom?" Contrary to the frown on his face, Alberu's eyes were full of curiosity. It was because he knew what Kale was planning to sell at the Whipper Kingdom, as well as how he was going to do it. "No. Unfortunately, it is not for that reason." "Then, I managed to capture one of the members of the organization that caused the Plaza Terror incident. This swordsman seems to hold a mid to low tier position with the organization." Alberu blinked a few times to think about whether he heard Kale correctly. However, his eyes soon were filled with shock. "How?" "No, never mind. That is not important. The how is important. We captured him in the Roan Kingdom." Alberu's expression quickly stiffened. Kale looked at Alberu's expression and started to think. He bit the bait. Alberu had bit onto this information. Kale hoped to no longer have to deal with the secret organization. At the same time, he didn't want to be the one who took care of them himself. How could the son of a count fight against an organization that could rock the entire continent? It would be difficult, even with a dragon by his side. That was why Kale thought of this person. It was someone whom neither the secret organization nor the elves could easily touch, as well as someone who would take care of it even more thoroughly than himself. It was someone who had negative feelings about the organization and wanted to get rid of them. At the same time, it was someone whose weakness was in Kale's hands. It could be none other than our dear Crown Prince. I can tell you the details after the discussions are completed. However, we managed to catch this person around the Roan Kingdom's 10-Finger Mountains. And why are you telling me all this? Kale smiled instead of responding, while Alberu clicked his tongue and continued to speak. Hand him over to me. Yes, sir. Alberu continued to frown as if he found the way Kale answered to be annoying. You seem to pass all of the annoying things to me. Do you not like it? No, it's great. So great. Contrary to Alberu's frowning face, his eyes were clear. The Roan Kingdom had not managed to discover the identity of the organization. Not being able to find any answers after a year of investigation was humiliating for the kingdom. That was why Kale knew that Alberu would do anything and everything to gather information from Balbud. Alberu would also use Balbud to his advantage. Your Highness. Yes. You're going to put him to use, aren't you? Alberu started to smile as he asked. For what? Asking even though he knows exactly what I am talking about. Naturally, for the Empire. Ha, ha, ha. Yes. I definitely will. The Empire still had not captured the secret organization and the Holy Twins that had killed the Pope. That fact did not sit well with Kale. The Empire claimed that they were fervently looking for the twins, however, having to deal with the Whipper Kingdom made it difficult for them to focus all of their attention on the search. At first glance, it might look like the Empire was taking their time in the search with the hope that the power of the Church of the Sun God would go down even more as time passes. However, this was an incident where hundreds of their citizens were killed as well. It is weird because the Imperial Prince is someone who cares a lot about saving face. It made no sense that the Empire had not figured anything out about the incident. The Empire even rejected the Roan Kingdom's offer to work together multiple times. That was why even Alberu was curious about what the Empire was doing. At the same time, Kale's train of thought was different. The Imperial Prince is someone who would set the jungle on fire to gain control. He also knows that the North will come down to invade, yet is instead waiting for the Roan Kingdom and the Breck Kingdom to lose strength while fighting the North. But such a person was leaving the secret organization alone. That made no sense. It had to be one of two reasons. Either the Empire wants to find the organization on their own in order to prove that they are better than everybody else. Or they have a secret relationship with ARM. There was something Kale had paid attention to while he was lounging around in Harris Village. Well, by paid attention, he gave some orders for others to do the work. Anyways, what Kale had done was get Ron to gather Frisia, the assassin posing as a sculptor, as well as others and create an information brigade. The Whipper Kingdom's Tunka will soon head to the Empire. Kale knew that the contents of Volume 5 were coming to an end soon. Of course, the story has twisted in many ways thanks to his interference. Tunka, who should have already been at war, was delayed, while the jungle was quickly becoming unified under Queen Latana's rule. I still have to do what I have to do. Kale still planned on going back to the Whipper Kingdom in order to profit. There were a lot of things to do once he got there. Hand the prisoner over to my aunt. Report everything that happens as well. Kale nodded his head as if that was obvious before he calmly continued on. Yes, sir. Oh, I am also selling dead mana. What? There's a large amount of it, so I think I will need to sell it in the Dark Elf City. There is no discount. I will sell it to you at the market price. I also only accept cash. Alberu, who was looking at Kale in disbelief, slowly started to speak with a serious expression on his face. How much is it? I will sell it to you at a fair price, Your Highness. Kale safely concluded his dead mana deal, as well as the issue of Balbud with Alberu, who was still full of disbelief. They discussed everything for quite a while, but the results were satisfactory. Maybe that was why, but he didn't mind having a long discussion with Chief Canaria regarding Balbud later that evening. The next morning, Kale was standing in front of the still unconscious Balbud. Kale sat down on a chair and crossed his legs as he looked down toward Balbud. Beacrox approached Balbud and asked, "Should I wake him up, young Master Nim?" "Yes." Beacrox grabbed Balbud's hair and splashed him with a bucket of water. Pendrick and the Guardian Knight who were standing behind Kale cautiously asked after seeing Beacrox's actions. "Are you going to tell him what is going to happen? Wouldn't it be better to take him while he is still unconscious?" "I'm not sure. I think it will be better to tell him at least some of it." Pendrick stopped talking after listening to Kale's relaxed response. Balbud was groaning as he started to come to his senses. The cold water did its job in waking him up. Kale stood up and took a step back as he quietly observed. He recalled the conversation he had with Chief Canaria last night. "Young Master Nim, wouldn't the kingdom know about our village if we work with the Crown Prince? One of the conditions for the Crown Prince will be keeping this village a secret. Plus, isn't it difficult on your own? None of the other elf villages will help you. They will just focus on protecting their own branch from the World Tree, especially if you explain what happened." Pendrick was shocked at what Kale had said. Kale was aware of the fact that elves were selfish and had no sense of race relations. Pendrick noticed Balbud opening his eyes and looking toward Kale as he closed his mouth. "Ugh, just what the hell dash?" Balbud's voice was a mess thanks to the poison from the other day. Kale started to smile at Balbud, who barely managed to realize what was going on. Balbud bit down on his lips and glared at Kale. "I don't like that look of yours." Kale sounded very calm as he frowned about Balbud's gaze. That calmness made Balbud even more anxious as he started to speak. What did you do to me?" "Nothing yet. But there is a lot planned from now." The phrase, "from now," made Balbud's shoulders slightly shake. However, the man looking down at him, Kale, continued to speak in his casual tone. "You will leave this elf village with me. Your life will be in my hands." Pendrick, who was behind Kale, made eye contact with the Guardian Knight. He did not know Kale would share such details with the prisoner. However, Kale's next words made Pendrick abruptly turn his gaze back toward Kale. "That is why I'm going to share my itinerary with you." Kale, who was seated once again, uncrossed his legs and lowered his head to make eye contact with Balbud. "What do you think is the strongest race after dragons?" Take a guess. Strongest race after dragons. Kale did not miss Balbud's pupils starting to shake. He could see his smiling face in Balbud's eyes. "Damn boy, you look so cool when you smile." After that moment of narcissistic reflection, Kale noticed that Balbud's face was filled with chaos and fear as he continued to speak. "I plan to meet with the whale tribe. The same whale tribe that hates the secret organization and wants to kill all of you. In fact, I'm meeting with the whale royalty." Kale heard Rayon's report as he stared at Balbud's pale face. "Human, this swordsman does not have any type of surveillance magic on him. That device from last time was the only one. That meant that nothing Kale said would be leaked to the secret organization. After that, I plan to go meet with a dragon. You know about dragons, right?" Darkness descended on Balbud's face. He clearly remembered Kale saying that they would be moving together. Kale stopped smiling as he continued on. "They are quite famous for being selfish and violent. Rayon's shocked voice went off in Kale's head. That is not the case. Of course, there are some dragons who are not like that. That's right. I am a very good dragon that likes to save things. Kale held back his sigh at Rayon's response before he made eye contact with Balbud, who was staring at him fiercely. This dragon is an ancient dragon who cherishes the world tree and the elves quite a bit. Kale stood up from the chair. Balbud, who was turning pale for multiple reasons, could see Kale looking down at him with a gentle expression. Kale fixed his clothes before saying one last thing to Balbud. Look forward to it. The next words were directed at Beacrox. Cover his eyes and knock him unconscious. Should I paralyze him as well? Yes. Balbud's eyes were slowly covered with a black cloth. Balbud debated whether he should flail around or scream, however, Kale's indifferent gaze made him stay still. He could not even die on his own accord anymore. He could hear the torturer asking Kale something else once he finished placing the blindfold around his eyes. What about a gag? That too. Yes, sir. You take care of everything. Just make sure he cannot kill himself, but that he is not relaxed either. Don't overdo it though. Got it. Yes, sir. A gag was placed inside Balbud's mouth. Kale peeked at Beacrox taking care of Balbud as he turned around. Shall we go? Pendrick and the Guardian Knight slowly nodded their heads at Kale's casual question. The two elves were looking at Kale as if he was an alien, but Kale just shrugged his shoulders. All he did was scare Balbud enough so that he can have a quiet journey until they met with Alberu's aunt, the dark elf, Tasha. Plus, it wasn't like he was lying. Kale asked Pendrick, who had been standing there with a blank expression until they made eye contact. Did you pack your bags? Yes, sir. Then I guess we can go. Kale's true new party member was Pendrick, not Balbud. However, there were people preventing Kale's group from leaving. It was the other elves of the village that Kale managed to avoid during his stay. Do you really have a dragon nymph's protection? Boom. The half-transparent elementals were causing a ruckus while flying around in front of Kale's eyes. Kale looked toward the one who asked him the question. There were many elves behind that elf with the same expression that was full of anticipation. What a pain. Kale could feel a headache brewing. However, the elves of the Ten-Finger Mountain Village had found a reason to do so, and were very persistent as they approached the human in front of them. That human, as expected, was Kale. Is it difficult to answer? Kale avoided eye contact with the elf in front of the group. Why did the two elves in the front have to be a grandma and a child? Kale looked toward Chief Canaria. I thought I made it clear that I wanted to leave quietly. Canaria gently smiled toward Kale. Kale found that smile to be annoying, however, this was not her fault. I'm sorry, young Master Nim. I only told my family. Kale turned his gaze toward the source of the apology. Pendrick looked very apologetic. He was the reason that their departure time and location was revealed. However, you could not blame him for telling his family about his departure. Well, in that case. Kale thought that he had at least avoided the worst possible situation with Rayon showing up and being revered. That was why he decided to use this to his advantage. Wouldn't it be easier to get the elves to do his bidding if he left with a good impression? No, that is not something to be sorry about. A benevolent smile was on Kale's face. That smile allowed Pendrick to let out a sigh of relief. However, Kale's group slowly started to avoid looking at Kale. Kale made eye contact with the young elf who was holding his grandma's hand. No, it is not difficult to answer. He seemed very gentle toward the child. Kale thought about the child's question from before. Do you really have a dragon nymph's protection? He could see that the elves and elementals all wanted an answer. Some of the elves were looking right at him, while others were off in the distance secretly peeping. Of course, the elementals were glowing and mumbling something, but Kale could not hear them. However, their voices were heard by the elves. This human is protected by a strong aura. It must be a dragon nymph's aura. I've never felt a dragon nymph's aura before. I will remember this forever. My goodness. A human that has so many natural auras on him. Fire, water, wind, and wood, all four of these are in different shapes on him. He also has an extra natural power that does not have an affinity. The elementals were currently shouting chaotically. I've never seen such a human before. He's not an elementalist or an elf. I can see why Dragon Nym would like him. He must be a human that is loved by ancient powers, no, by nature. What an interesting human. The elves turned even more pensive after hearing the elemental's words. This was the same for Chief Canaria and the Guardian Knight as well. Only Pendrick did not know about it, as he could not hear the elementals. Kale, who was in the same boat as Pendrick, did not know about the elementals going crazy as he started to speak. The dragon protects the weak me. Ah. Gasps could be heard throughout the crowd. At that moment, Rayon, who was invisible and stuck on Kale's back, as usual, started to speak into Kale's mind. I'm glad you know, weak human. Kale just ignored Rayon's comment and started to smile while looking at the elf child. However, that smile soon started to flinch at the child's response. Wow. I'm so jealous. You're the best. You're so cool. The child's triple combo of praise landed on Kale before the child continued to speak. I wanted to go meet you when you were in the World Trees Garden, that flower garden. However, your subordinates were so strict and so I could not go. I've never met such strong people before. They seem to be stronger than even the human royal knights. The child peeked toward the rest of the group as he said that. He then hid behind his grandma, like he was scared. An elf was scared of a human. Just what the hell did they do to protect me for those 3 days? Kale had a feeling that it wasn't him that avoided the elves, but the elves that avoided him because of what Choi Han and crew did during the 3 days that he was unconscious. They just gathered here today to say goodbye to Pendrick. Kale received a few more questions after answering the child's question. The majority of them came from other children. What is Dragon Nym like? Rayon's front paw continued to tap on Kale's back. Kale answered with a gentle smile. I am great and mighty. He is great and mighty. Kale answered as Rayon instructed him to do. Since things ended up like this, wouldn't it be great to be known as the lucky human who received the protection of a great and mighty dragon? He felt like he could see the elf's interest level going up, like he was playing a game. Wow. Is he handsome? Rayon naturally gave him the answer again. Handsome and beautiful. He is handsome and beautiful. Wow. The children's admiration, as well as the adults' nods of approval, continued. Kale wanted to shake his head. They would all fall back and cheer endlessly if a real dragon appeared in front of them. Dragon Nym must be very strong. There is nothing in the world as strong as my body. Of course. He is very strong. Kale answered like a ventriloquist's doll. Rayon's voice started to get louder in his head. I really am the great and mighty Rayon Miru. I am also 1 year older now. Kale was getting a headache from all the noise around him. He still managed to motion to Ron with his eyes however, and Ron stepped forward with Choi Han in order to create a path for Kale. Kale followed the two of them to the entrance of the elf village. An old elf who was with the children that followed Kale to the entrance slowly started to speak. Would it be possible to meet Dragon Nym? I can show up right now. Kale had no plans of letting the elves meet with a dragon. He was planning on using that card in the future when it would be to his benefit. As for now, it was best to leave his identity as the human who was the closest to a dragon. Kale stopped walking and opened up his arms. The elves who were following Kale, as well as the ones peeking from a distance, all listened to Kale's voice. Can't you feel the great and mighty aura of Dragon Nym around us? I believe that all of you elf Nyms, the ones who are said to be the closest to nature, would be able to feel this great and mighty aura. Naturally, the older elves and the elementals could feel the aura around Kale. It was as if a dragon was casually roaming around Kale. However, they thought that there was no way a dragon would follow a human around. Unless it was crazy, a dragon would never do that, especially while keeping itself invisible. They believed that they were sensing the dragon's aura that was protecting the human in front of them. Kale observed the elves nodding their heads and continued to speak. I will speak with the Dragon Nym and see if I can create an opportunity for you to speak with Dragon Nym in the future. The elves jerked their heads up only to see a gloomy expression on Kale's face. However, right now, as you all probably know, the village is in a difficult place and many scary things are happening around the continent. I need to quickly leave to deal with some of those things. Some of the elves nodded their heads. These were the ones who were watching Kale from afar. The elf village was a mess. They barely managed to fend off the invaders who were aiming for the branch of the world tree. They did not like the attitudes of the other elves who were praising a human during such a time. It wasn't like Dragon Nim was here. Of course, it was fine to accept and respect a person who has received the protection of a dragon, but they did not like such a happy atmosphere in a time of trouble. While they had such thoughts on their minds, Kale's words reached their ears. They could clearly tell that the human in front of them was the one who had saved them from despair. Kale still kept this gloomy atmosphere about him. They could feel a sense of responsibility on Kale's shoulders. It was solidified even further by Kale's next words. I have a lot to do. These were the tasks that were assigned to me. The adult elves' expression stiffened at those words. They felt like they knew what Kale was trying to do, even without him telling them. Just like when he had saved their village, and just like they had heard from the chief about the other time when he saved the capital, he probably had similar things to do. He was probably going to sacrifice himself again without seeking any material gain. Kale observed the calmer crowd that was focused on him and started to think. I definitely have a lot of things to do. He needed to trick Tunka and make some profit. He needed to meet with a lot of people. Of course, he didn't know what the order of things would be, but he needed to do everything in the near future. It was nice meeting with all of you, the friends of nature. However, I believe it is time for me to leave. The children who still had a lot of questions seemed disappointed, but the adults consoled them and created a path for Kale. Kale looked back at his group that had stopped to wait for him. The elf healer, Pendrick, seemed to be full of admiration. However, Beecrox, Ron, and the kittens were doing their best to hold themselves back from shaking their heads, while Choi Han and Locke were nodding their heads as if they agreed with Kale. Human, this is why I cannot leave you alone. You uselessly weak but very useful human. It was now normal for Kale to ignore Rayon's nonsense. He was right about to start walking again, but soon stopped. The half-transparent elementals that had been chaotically flying around lined up to create a path for him. They looked like lamps lighting up a path. They said something while standing in line, however, Kale had no way of understanding. He just walked down the path in order to leave the village. He's a decent person. It's just disappointing that he is not an elementalist. I want to introduce him to my friend. He reminds me of the ancient heroes my mother told me about. They were said to be similar. I really think he is a good person. I couldn't tell for sure earlier, but he seems very pure. Although Kale would have scoffed if he heard what the elementals were saying, none of the elves were scoffing at their comments. Only Chief Canaria greeted Kale at the entrance with an odd expression on her face. Chief Nim, I will be on my way now. Canaria asked a question instead of saying goodbye. Young Master Nim, you said your family is in the northeast. Yes. She could read the wariness in Kale's eyes. Canaria started to smile, as this Kale was much easier to deal with than the valiant Kale from earlier. Young Master Kale, I believe that you currently do not possess the power of Earth. The Roan Kingdom is the kingdom of boulders, and this is where the power of the Earth is at its strongest. Boulders are the strongest form of Earth. Kale did not hide his thoughts as he made eye contact with Canaria. And Kale did not have any plan of gaining any more ancient powers. He would have all 5 elements of nature if he gained the power of Earth. He had an ominous feeling that doing something like that would lead to a difficult future. Canaria, who noticed Kale's expression stiffening up, carefully handed the book that was in her arms to Kale. Kale did not take it, and instead just looked at her with confusion. She started to explain what the book was about. This is a book that discusses an ancient legend related to the Earth. It is very old. We cannot decipher its meaning at all, however, I feel that you may need this in the future. Kale looked at the book that Canaria was pushing toward him. An ancient legend. That made him want to not take the book. He didn't need it. However, her continued words made Kale's eyes open wide. It is quite a funny legend. A hero with a strong destructive power supposedly was extremely greedy for money. Once that hero died, the hero in this legend is said to have found the wealth of his friend and kept it safe. Canaria snorted. Would a hero be greedy for money? Especially a hero who supposedly saved the world from freezing and did not seek any power, influence, or fame. How could someone like that be greedy for money? Isn't it unbelievable? She looked at Kale for validation. Kale also snorted and nodded his head. Of course. How could a hero be like that? Furthermore, many ancient legends are a mix of lies and the truth. That is often the case. Anyways, this book is about the legend of the other hero, who was both the greedy hero's friend and enemy. This hero seems to be the one who used the power of Earth. Canaria looked toward Kale, who seemed to have a lot on his mind. Kale slowly reached his hand out and Canaria put the book in his hand. To be honest with you, I do not think you will find the ancient power described in this book. However, since we do not need this book, I thought it would be great if it could even help you a little bit, since you helped save our village. It is not a precious book. To be honest with you, no. Canaria thought it might make Kale feel bad, but decided to tell the truth. We have a warehouse where the elves gather things they don't need. I remembered that this book was in that warehouse and brought it over. However, she still thought that this book would not be of much help to Kale. That was because she had gone to the location described in the book, but did not find anything. But since he is lucky. You needed a lot of luck to find ancient powers, to the point that it was said that the heavens determined the owner of each ancient power. However, this human in front of her had enough luck to gather 5 ancient powers. That was why she brought this book over. Kale had an awkward expression on his face as he took the book. I will take it for now, since you say that the elf village does not need it. It is difficult to say no to such generosity. However, ancient powers are not something you can just gain because you want to. Of course. You need the mandate of heaven to get it. But it is still an unbelievable and funny legend, so at least give it a read. Thank you. I will. Kale slowly put the book away and shook hands with Canaria. Let us meet again if it is the will of the heavens, Chief Nim. I hope we can meet together with Dragon Nim next time. Chief. I am right here. Kale ignored Rayon's shout and said goodbye to Canaria. He touched the book in his pocket and started to think. There is a reason the fire of destruction appeared near this elf village. He thought that the fire of destruction appeared nearby because this book was in the village. Although it might have been a coincidence, he thought that there might be something there. He recalled what the chief had said. Would a hero be greedy for money? Especially a hero who supposedly saved the world from freezing and did not seek any power, influence, nor fame. How could someone like that be greedy for money? Isn't it unbelievable? Of course, it made sense. Why would it not make sense? Kale had made it rain money for that hero not too long ago. Kale was almost certain that the greedy hero in this book was the owner of the Fire of Destruction. He also had a feeling that the hero's frenemy was the Super Rock. Although boulders were just a subproperty of Earth, it was still a part of the Earth. So, the owner of the Super Rock took the Fire of Destruction's owner's money. Kale's heart was beating, not because of the ancient power, but because of the money. It didn't matter whether he earned the ancient power or not, but couldn't he just take the money? Kale held back a smirk and said his final goodbye. Goodbye now. Have a safe trip. Kale walked into the half-transparent hut that was the entrance to the illusion magic hiding the elf village. The rest of the group followed behind him. Kale had finally left the elf village for the first time in a few days. He then stopped walking right outside of the boundary. He let out a sigh. The group slowly turned their gazes away and into the distance at his sigh. Choi Han and Locke let out some fake coughs and lowered their heads, while Ron and Beakrok still remained calm. An and Hong meowed while in Choi Han's arms before looking away toward a mountain in the distance. Human. Can you see the glorious evidence of our battle? We destroyed it all. Rayon proudly shouted in Kale's mind. Yes, they really did destroy everything. Kale had wondered why the elf chief had to personally help out with the restoration. But after looking at the site in front of him, it all made sense. There were a lot of trees that were destroyed, and the ground was turned over in many spots. Some boulders also looked like they were cut in half by swords or auras. However, Kale could not say anything. Human, your thunderbolt left the biggest mark. Can you see it? It is a pretty useful power, but do not use it ever again. He could not say anything because he had done the most damage to the land. There was a giant crater on the ground that looked like a meteor had landed. Everything in that crater was completely charred black. Kale looked away toward a distant mountain peak as he started to speak. Let's go. He then asked Beacrox before using the sound of the wind to move away from the valley. He's not too heavy, right? Yes, sir. Beacrox, who had Balbud on his shoulder, made it look like Balbud did not weigh a pound. Balbud, whose eyes, mouth, and ears were all covered, was still unconscious. Kale verified that everyone was ready before heading out of the valley and toward Bloke village. Although they arrived at the village quickly, he stopped at the foot of the mountain because of Balbud. Young Master Nim. Deputy Butler Hans bowed and greeted Kale. The kittens, An and Hong, jumped out of Choi Han's arms and into Hans's arms. Kale walked past Hans and reached his hand out to someone else. Has it been about 3 months? Yes, young Master Kale. Rosalind, who had returned from the Breck Kingdom, smiled back at Kale. She took a piece of paper out of her pocket in order to respond to Kale's gaze that seemed to be asking how it went. It indicated that Rosalind would be the captain of the Roan Kingdom and Breck Kingdom's mage alliance at the beginning of a war. Kale started to laugh as he greeted Rosalind. Welcome back, Miss Rosalind. That's what I wanted to hear. Kale let go of Rosalind's hand before giving an order to Hans. He needed to meet with the dark elf, Tasha, once again. Hans, we are first heading to the capital. Kale met Tasha at an inn outside of the capital. The basement has been completely redone. It was the same inn that Kale had used the last time he was in the capital when he delivered the bracelet to Alberu. Kale had heard that Alberu had purchased this inn. Currently, the ground floor of this building was an inn as usual, while the basement was being used to house the mages. There are a lot of mages. The basement had 3 levels in total, with approximately 30 mages running around getting things done. They all flinched once they saw Kale's group before they respectfully bowed toward Rosalind and then disappeared. Because this was all being done in secret, there were a lot of advanced magic devices throughout the area. The newest defense magic was purchased in order to fortify the basement as well. Tasha, who was the same height as Kale, lifted her head toward Kale and asked. Young Master Kale, isn't this place wonderful? Kale could tell that Tasha was joking, and so he played along. I think our Henadis castle will be much better. Really? Tasha waved her hand and started to laugh. There was no way that was true. This was an area made with the help of the talented mages from the Whipper Kingdom. The Whipper Kingdom was known for their magic devices. There was no way anywhere in the kingdom could match up to the basement in front of them. That was why Tasha knew that Kale was joking. He probably just said that because he loved his home very much. Come on, young Master Kale, this is much nicer than the Henadis castle. Although this may not be the best location, it has the newest magic devices. As you already know, the number of magic devices are currently dwindling. Of course, there is an anonymous merchant monopolizing and selling a lot of magic devices. I wonder where he got all of those magic devices from. It was as Tasha said. That was why the fact that Alberu was creating a place for the mages to develop magic devices would be beneficial for the Roan Kingdom in the future. That was also why Tasha was looking at Kale with pride. However, she slowly started to realize something was off. Kale, who was looking back at her, seemed to be half serious with what he had said. Tasha looked toward Rosalind, whom she had seen quite frequently these past few months. Tasha then flinched after seeing Rosalind standing there with an awkward smile. That made Tasha look over at the rest of Kale's group. There was Beacrox, who was still carrying the paralyzed Balbud, as well as Ron, Choi Han, Locke, An, and Hong. All of them were looking around with indifference. Their unexpected reactions made Tasha look back at Kale, who was smiling. That smile made Tasha become uncertain as she started to speak. Young Master. Really? Did the Henadis castle really have more magic devices than this basement? Although she did not manage to get the whole question out, Kale casually answered back. I'm not joking. Rosalind nodded her head in agreement. Yeah. Tasha let out a sigh. The Roan Kingdom was not known for having a strong presence of magic. But the Henadis territory, the one that was located in the farthest corner of the continent, had all of the newest magic devices. At that moment, Kale approached her and whispered in her ear. Didn't His Highness tell you that he would get a part of the blueprints for a magic tower for you? That was top secret information. Tasha's pupils started to shake before quickly calming back down. Her stiff expression loosened up and she started to laugh. Ha, ha, ha. She brushed her long hair back and asked Kale. I was wondering where he was going to get it from. You will be providing it. Why are you asking such an obvious question? Kale pushed it aside like it was nothing. He really felt that way. It would not make sense for him to not keep the blueprints when he was going to go destroy the magic tower. Currently, the Henadis castle and the castle walls were almost finished with the renovations. On the surface, Rosalind was in charge of the magic devices, however, the majority of them were made by Rayon. I don't give him 10 silver coins as an allowance for nothing. He wasn't giving Rayon an allowance on a whim. He had given it to Rayon knowing that Rayon would end up making all of the magic devices for the castle and his ship. Furthermore, it is said to be better to learn about saving money when you are young. Young Master Kale, I want to go visit the Henadis castle. It is still under renovation. Come visit when it is completed. Really? Kale nodded his head and added on. Yes. Bring Mary with you too. He wanted Tasha to bring him a worker. Tasha let out a sigh-like laugh and vigorously nodded her head. Then I shall properly guide you now. Her gaze headed over to Balbud. She looked at the blindfold and earplugs on Balbud before looking back toward Kale and starting to speak. We spent a ton of money on the underground prison so that he can't run away. Although Tasha had a magic necklace on to make her look human, Kale could see her black pupils and black hair showing. Is that so? We are building a prison as well. I wonder how this one will be. Kale accepted it like it was normal. He followed Tasha down to the 3rd level of the basement. Kale then entered one of the prison cells. It's pretty nice. Isn't it? It'll be a nice place for him to stay. Kale looked around the prison cell. There were multiple cells on this floor, but this specific cell seemed nicer than the others. It looked like a typical room at an inn, but the unique thing about this cell was that all of the corners were rounded. It was built in a circular fashion so as to prevent the prisoner from being able to harm themselves. Kale understood their intent. It looks like you've selected the path of mental torture instead of physical torture. He could see Tasha nodding her head at his words. This was not just any criminal. He was someone with a bit of rank in the organization that was responsible for a terror incident at the capital. There was no way they would treat him like any other criminal. TSK. Kale clicked his tongue and motioned to Beacrox, who sat Balbud down on a couch. He then removed the blindfold and the earplugs. Balbud could not stop shaking because of the paralyzing poison. However, he had to open his eyes. Open your eyes. It was because of Beacrox's cold voice. Balbud had to work hard to be able to open his eyes, and once he did, he saw a nice room that looked kind of odd. There were many eyes looking down at him as he sat there tied up. Tasha looked toward Kale with confusion, as Balbud seemed to be in decent condition. She had heard that Balbud had received a big injury. Her confused gaze made Kale start to speak. He cannot move his lower body. However, we healed the small injuries around his body. You really are too nice, young Master Kale. Tasha shook her head. Balbud could not believe it. They had tortured him with all sorts of poisons every day without killing him. Of course, Beacrox had done that while saying that he still wanted to learn more about poisons. Kale pretended not to notice the actions of the son who had not forgotten about how his father had lost his left arm. Kale avoided Tasha's gaze, that seemed to be asking how there could be such a soft person. Tasha then turned to look at Balbud when Kale started to speak. If you are planning to use mental torture, should I introduce you to an expert? The excommunicated priestess, Cage, was an expert in mental torture. No thank you. We have our own methods. Kale looked away as Tasha smiled toward Balbud. She really was not just an average dark elf. There was a reason she was responsible for everything in the shadows for Alberu. I look forward to chatting with you in the future. Tasha's gentle voice toward Balbud gave Kale the chills. Kale motioned to Tasha that they should leave the cell after Kale saw Balbud's pale face, and Tasha got up and headed out of the cell with them. Tasha verified that everyone other than Balbud was out before she ordered the guards to guard properly as they headed back up to the surface. She casually asked Kale a question as they walked up the stairs. How were the elves? Kale could hear both curiosity and wariness in her voice. Kale had left Hans and Pendrick at a different inn today. It was because there was a complicated relationship between elves and the Dark Elves. Kale pretended not to know about that complicated relationship as he answered back to Tasha. Typical elves. Really? You must be their eternal benefactor since you protected their branch of the world tree though. There's also Rayon. Rayon. Tasha, who understood what Kale meant by saying Rayon was there, nodded her head in admiration. They must have treated you like a saint. Kale could not think of anything to say in return. Tasha stealthily asked Kale, whose silence seemed to acknowledge that she was right. Just what are you selling to the Whipper Kingdom that Alberu keeps laughing for no reason when he is alone? His Highness keeps laughing when he is alone. 1. Kale felt like that scene could be part of a horror movie. Kale did not want to see Alberu laughing like that. Yes. Every time I go to report to him, he's always laughing while saying that he's looking forward to what you are going to do. I guess that's possible. Tasha could see that Kale's smile was similar to Alberu's smile. The two of them really were similar. This made her certain about one thing. It's not something that will benefit the Whipper Kingdom. Of course not. I am a citizen of the Roan Kingdom. That indifference response made Tasha feel relieved. Tasha, who hid her relief from Kale, opened the door to the surface and cheered Kale on. I hope everything goes well. Let's drink together next time. Sure. Kale, who stepped back onto the surface, could hear Rayon's voice in his head. Is what we are going to do considered a scam? Rayon had heard everything Alberu had discussed with Kale, as well as everything Kale had done to prepare. Technically it is not a scam. It was not a scam. It was just that he was only going to sell half of the item. Either way, I just need to destroy the magic tower as you want. Will you give me 10 silver coins if I do it? Kale whispered back to Rayon, who seemed to be full of anticipation. I'll give you a gold coin. Oh, my lord. The dragon was shocked. Kale started to imagine the show that would play out as they destroyed the magic tower. It sounded like it was going to be quite entertaining. Rayon, who was thinking about getting a gold coin, snapped out of it to ask Kale a question. Kale, who was about to get on the carriage, stopped for a moment after hearing Rayon's question. Are we going to go meet the large whale and the little rat? Kale nodded his head as he got on the carriage. Hans and Pendrick soon joined them in the carriage as they headed toward the Roan Kingdom's northeastern coast, the location of the Abar Territory's naval base. Kale slowly looked around the Abar Territory coast that he had not seen for a few months. He sent Ron and Beacrox to the Cliff of Winds to meet with Watira while Kale moved around with only Choi Han, Locke, and Pendrick by his side. An and Hong chose to head to the residence with Hans, as they did not like water. Human. Of course, Rayon was with Kale. Human, that thing. Rayon called out to Kale a few times, but could not finish his sentence. But Rayon was not the only one. Young Master Nim. Kale Nim. Oh my. Locke, Choi Han, and Pendrick were each at a loss of words as well. Kale could not help but look at that thing while trying to look around the naval base. Good thing we made it so that only those with the proper authorization could enter the base. Thanks to Alberu, who was extremely wary of the Northern Alliance sending some spies, the naval base was under multiple layers of security. That was why Kale was relieved after seeing the thing in front of him. Choi Han pointed toward the Hennidas portion of the coast with his finger. Kale Nim, that is a ship, right? Yes, it is a ship. Of course, this was Kale's first time seeing it as well. He had only received reports about how the construction was going through video communication. Choi Han was mumbling like an idiot with a shocked expression on his face. An extremely large ship was in front of his eyes. Anybody will be able to tell that is a Hennidas ship. Kale, who was confidently nodding his head, actually, Kim Rok-Soo, was relieved after seeing the almost completed ship. It was different compared to the Korean turtle ship that he knew about. 2. Choi Han seemed to be just shocked at the size of the ship, rather than thinking about Korea or the turtle ship as Kale had. Unlike the turtle ship on Kale's mind, this ship did not have a turtle shell covering the deck. Instead, the deck was open with turtle shell-shaped walls on either side of the ship. The plan was for many different magic devices to be inside these shell-shaped walls so that they can shoot up into the air. Ah. Kale let out a sigh after seeing the ship. He had underestimated his father and the Henitus family's way of doing things. Rayon, who had been quiet for a while, finally started to speak again. Human, is that all gold? Is all of that yellow actually gold? All of those shiny things on the ship are gold. Choi Han let out a gasp. It is a golden turtle. The turtle shells on both sides of the ship were gold in color. Furthermore, there was a dashing turtle sculpture at the bow of the ship. Even the ship's mast had a golden turtle on it. All of the gold on the ship was shining brightly underneath the sun. Young Master Nim, I didn't know you were from such a wealthy family. Even Pendrick, who had no desire for materialistic things, could not help but gasp at the large amount of gold on the ship. Kale looked toward them and clarified things. He needed to do so before they got the wrong idea. I want to say this so that all of you do not get the wrong idea. Kale noticed Mueller running over from the shore as well as Watira, Ron, and Beacrox heading toward them from the Cliff of Winds. He then looked back at the group that was with him and slowly started to speak. They were all waiting to hear what he had to say. It is only gold-plated. It was not completely made of gold. Choi Han and Pendrick looked toward him with shocked expressions, but Kale had said what he needed to say, so he ignored them and greeted Watira, who arrived before Mueller. Long time no see. Yes, young Master Kale. Have you been well? Contrary to Watira's happy greeting, she did not look well. I've been well, but you don't seem too good. Kale asked about it right away, since he didn't like to beat around the bush. Watira nodded her head as if she had expected this and started to speak. She also did not want to waste time beating around the bush. She got right to the point. We ended up getting tangled up with the eastern continent because of the mermaids. At that moment, Ron and Beacrox looked toward Watira. The eastern continent was their hometown and a place that Kale did not know much about. We gathered a lot of information thanks to that, but there is something that is difficult for us to do. I came all hoping that you might be able to help us. You want to ask me for a favor? Not a favor, but an exchange of information. Kale had expected this. It would not be something small, since the whale tribe said they would come in person. However, he could not feign ignorance and avoid them. He needed to know what was going on so that he could avoid any headaches. He was certain that it was related to the secret organization. If it was too difficult for Kale to deal with, he planned on passing it off to someone else, like the elves, Alberu, or even the gold dragon. Speak. Kale motioned for Watira to continue. She cautiously started to speak again. The ones who gave us this information were the members of the race that was known for being the strongest race in the eastern continent. Strongest race. Although that caught Kale's attention, he focused more on the was known for being portion that seemed to describe it as something from the past. He felt a chill run down his back, even though there was no breeze. The tiger tribe was at the point of being obliterated because of that organization. We happened to run into their shaman. The tiger tribe. Kale did not hear anything else Watira had to say. He blanked out the moment she said, tiger tribe, and blinked his eyes a few times. The tiger tribe? Kale asked to see if he had heard correctly. However, Watira thought that he had not heard correctly and stopped what she was saying to confirm. Yes, the tiger tribe. Just the name alone made it sound like it would be one of the strongest races in the eastern continent. They apparently also had a shaman. Kale couldn't help but wonder. Do I have some unknown affinity with animals? He could not understand why he kept getting tangled up with so many different types of beast people. Furthermore, they were all beast people who were either struggling or in danger. It's not like I'm running an animal hospital or something. Kale looked around him. Ron and Beacrox were already standing by Watira and Kale so that they could see if anybody was approaching them. They really were a sharp father-son duo. Kale's gaze turned back toward Watira. What is the information that you want to trade? Watira used her tongue to lick her lower lips after seeing Kale's gaze. Her mouth was going dry after seeing how Kale looked like he had no interest at all in her information. However, Kale's mind was just in a state of chaos right now. What a mess it would be if I get tangled up with tigers too. Kale was thinking about how horrible the future would be as Watira finally started to speak. Actually, you do not necessarily need to give us any information. It is us sharing information with you. Kale's expression became odd. Nothing in life was free. He continued to stare at Witira before he proceeded to speak. I'll at least listen to what you have to say. Witira nodded her head and started to speak. She recited the information she had gathered while patrolling the eastern continent's coast. The organization you mentioned before, ARM, has taken full control of the eastern continent's underworld. Ron's eyes headed toward Witira's lips. The Tiger tribe discovered that a portion of ARM had crossed over to the western continent. While gathering more information about that, they learned that a large number of experts have already arrived on the western continent. Kale nodded his head. It made sense. The magic spearman, the blonde sword master, all of them were rare experts. Witira observed Kale nodding his head as she continued to speak. And they discovered that ARM's first battle brigade, one of their many battle brigades, will conduct a large-scale move in the near future. Kale, who was just blankly nodding his head, stopped moving. What did you say? Kale wondered if he had heard correctly. What is coming over? The first battle brigade. The Tiger tribe is certain that the entire brigade is getting ready to move. Where? Here. The western continent. Yes, the western continent. Oh. Kale was at a loss for words after hearing this information that was much larger in scale than he had expected. He then raised his hand to cover his neck because it was getting the chills. Witira noticed the worried expression on Kale's face. I knew he would worry about it. She started to feel warm thinking that Kale was seriously worried about the western continent. However, Kale was worried about himself, not the continent. Young Master Kale, that is why. That is why. There's more. Kale looked toward Witira, who brought over information he did not want, like he was looking at a ticking bomb. However, Witira continued to speak, as if she was trying to resolve the concern on Kale's mind. The Tiger tribe and the whales are currently running around gathering more information. The Tiger tribe expects the brigade to move this winter. Kale started to frown. Witira had said that the Tiger tribe was close to extinction because of ARM. So why were they poking their noses around digging up information? Were they aiming to get revenge? The Tiger tribe had a suggestion for us when they shared that information with us. Kale quickly started to speak. He had a feeling that he should not hear the details of their suggestion. I see. So, what is the information you want from me? That was his way of trying to brush it aside. However, it was for naught, as Witira nodded her head and described the suggestion. What they suggested was that, the moment the first battle brigade reaches the center of the ocean. Kale started to frown and looked down at Witira's waist. Tap. Tap. Witira was caressing the whip wrapped around her waist as she slowly continued to speak. We kill them all. Kale let out a deep sigh. He finally understood why the secret organization worked with the mermaids in order to try to take control of the sea route. It was so that they could move their members to the western continent safely. Every word that Witira was saying sounded like thunder in Kale's ears. The Tiger tribe thinks we should get rid of them and leave no traces behind. The ocean will be advantageous for us because we will be able to reduce the number of injuries on our side, as well more easily capture some prisoners to pry out more information. Really? Yes. It is a very entertaining plan. Hoo-hoo. Witira's laugh roamed around Kale's head. They're so scary. ARM was one of the branches of the secret organization. That meant that their first battle brigade would be very strong. For that reason, Kale did not want to get involved with this oceanic battle. That was why Kale asked his earlier question once again. So, what is the information that you want from me? Witira did not respond right away. She peeked at Kale for a bit, before cautiously starting to speak. The Tiger tribe is looking for some information in return for spying on ARM until winter time. To be honest with you, we want to provide them with that information if possible, because we need to get revenge on that organization as well. Kale just silently stared at Witira instead of answering. Witira then continued to speak. It actually isn't a very difficult piece of information to get. However, I thought you would have more knowledge about it than us. Knowledge. Kale did not hide his wariness at the fact that the word, information, had changed to knowledge. However, Witira slowly started to explain what she needed. They are looking for a large area that does not have many people. As for the temperature, the cooler it is, the better. Furthermore, they need a forest, and it would be best if there isn't any ruling power in the area. But it still needs to have a way to connect with the human world so that they can exchange any necessary items. 1. Kale could not understand why the tiger tribe would need such information. Why do they want to know about such a place? So that the tiger tribe can move there. In that case, there is a dash dot. Kale could not finish his sentence as he looked toward Witira. What are the tigers trying to do? Yes, it makes sense they want information on such a location because they want to move. That is why I was hoping you might know of a suitable place. Kale could not say anything. Did he know of such a place? A place without people nor a ruling power. Cool, but not cold, along with a forest. At the same time, has easy access to trade with humans. Rayon's voice shouted out in his head. He sounded like a contestant on a game show who was about to answer the winning question. There is such a place. The Forest of Darkness. Kale naturally ignored Rayon's answer. I'm not sure. I can't think of anywhere right now. Why did he ignore Rayon? Would Witira be asking because she doesn't know the answer? The reason she was asking like this was because she wanted Kale to be the one to bring up the Forest of Darkness. Really? See. Witira's expression right now was one that seemed to be saying that she knows Kale knows the answer to her question. She desperately seemed to want Kale to say it. Human, you don't know. I do. Just repeat after me. Forest of Darkness. Nope. Not doing it. Yeah. I can't think of anywhere right now. Kale's expression seemed realistic. He really seemed like he didn't know. Witira lightly bit down on her lips before nodding her head. In that case, could you let us know if you remember such a place next time we meet? Sure. I'll do that. Kale had no plans of doing that. She's going to ask me to let the tigers live there if I say the Forest of Darkness. Of course, the whale tribe would not ask for that favor without compensation. They would probably compensate him fairly, however, Kale did not want that. Taking in the tiger tribe that wants to get revenge on the secret organization was like jumping in front of a train. Well, it would be beneficial to have the tigers with us when the Northern Knights come down. But he still didn't think this was the right answer. He already had a wolf battle squad. By the time Kale organized his thoughts, Witira started to say something else. Oh, the organization is going to send a couple of people across the ocean first in an attempt to find a sea route where they can avoid us. She sounded very casual. Kale immediately asked back. You're just going to let them do that? Yes. We will just observe them. The reason for this was obvious. Kale immediately answered back. You want to see where they go? Yes. He knew that was the case. The whales probably wanted to know where they were headed. Those members probably wouldn't head right to ARM's western base, but they should be able to gather some information about it. Alright, work hard. Work hard. That was what he wanted to say before ending the conversation. However, he looked around, feeling a lot of gazes on him. Agu. Ron, Becrox, Choi Han, Locke, and even Pendrick. Although Rosalind, Hans, An, and Hong were not here, the majority of his battle strength were all staring at him. All of them were people who had negative feelings about ARM. But it is still too much. Kale found it odd that their level of anger seemed to have increased, however, he could only start to speak again after seeing Ron and Choi Han's cold gazes. Yes, work hard. You'll share the information with me. Of course. Good. Choi Han was staring at him and Witira. He looked like he was ready to pick up his sword and run wild. Ron was clenching his dagger tightly. Does that old man still hold a grudge for his arm? However, the cowardly Kale ended up having to say one more thing. Ahem, let me know as soon as you find out where they are going. Kale peeked around once more. Choi Han nodded his head in satisfaction, while Ron started to smile and mumble. I need to make them cough up blood and starve to death. Such scary words. Kale, who had coughed up blood and starved after using the fire thunderbolt, started to shiver after hearing those words. He then started to think. These people really are too much for a coward like me to handle. Young Master Kale. What is it? Witira pointed to a spot behind Kale. Her action made Kale turn around, only to see the golden turtle shell shining in the sun. Is that your ship? Witira's voice was shaking. Kale did not know this as he nodded his head. Yes. To be more accurate, it is a ship that belongs to our territory. You figured it out right away. Kale pointed to Mueller, who was fidgeting off to the side without being able to approach them. He made it. Flick. Kales flicked his index finger as a signal for Mueller to approach, and Mueller quickly ran over. This dwarf and rat half-blood were still short, but he had gotten a bit plump. Young Master Nim, great to see you again. Have you been well? Hee hee. Mueller, who was smiling as he greeted Kale, was much less scared than before. Kale was shocked, but he liked it like this. This was better than having Mueller being scared of everything. Yes, I have been well. An and Hong want to see you. The four of us will have dinner together at some point. Hiccup. Mueller suddenly started to hiccup. His shoulders closed in as he cautiously started to speak. Did the two respected kitten Nims come with you? Yes. They keep talking about you. They must be really excited to see you again. Mueller's face became pale. Kale did not care about this as he introduced Mueller to Witira. He is a dwarf and rat half-blood and is extremely talented. Right, Mueller. Both Witira and Kale turned to look at Mueller. Mueller flinched after seeing Witira's beauty, before vigorously nodding his head and starting to shout. Yes, sir. This ship is designed to have the strongest offensive capabilities and will dominate the seas in the future. You will never be able to find another ship like this. Witira nodded her head. Even she could tell that the golden ship in front of her had extremely strong defense. Although she could not tell how strong the offensive capabilities of the ship will be, she knew that it would be completed properly, since Kale was in charge of it. Young Master Kale really has good foresight. Witira was amazed at how Kale was already ready for naval warfare. Young Master Kale, you really are amazing. Me. Yes. Mueller stopped talking once he saw that Witira and Kale were chatting with each other once again. He wanted to explain that this ship had the greatest defense in the world, however, he did not have the moment to do that. As he stood there disappointed, Kale asked him a question. The blueprints for the villa? They are almost completed, sir. Kale started to smile. Kale was talking about the blueprints for Kale's new villa that would be built on the Abar coast. It was a house that would allow him to safely enjoy the slacker life, even during a war. The details of this dream house were being described by Mueller. I plan to expand the basement as much as possible while being as sturdy as possible. It will also have an extremely strong defense. Pat. Kale leaned over to pat the short Mueller on the shoulder. You'll need to give it your all to make it. Yes, sir. I will definitely get it done. Good. I will trust you. The word, trust, made Mueller turn even more pale. However, Witira was amazed. Although they are calling it a villa, it sounds more like he is making a secret base. A sturdy building with a large basement. It was perfect for a secret base. Witira could see the others behind Kale as well. Choi Han continued to nod his head with a smile on his face. The others seemed pretty relaxed as well. They really are special. Witira did not share her thoughts as she turned to speak to Kale, who was finished speaking to Mueller. Will you be leaving tomorrow? That is the plan. It was almost 1 year since Kale had last visited the Whipper Kingdom. But there was one other thing Kale needed to do before heading back. Kale returned to the magic tower right before a year had gone by. Young Master Nim, we're glad to see you again after such a long time. Kale shook the hand of the person in front of him. This was the former liege of the magic tower's secret son, the one who was the child of a Whipper Kingdom citizen and a mage, the unfortunate person who could not use mana. He was the crazy bastard who was one of Tunka's top advisors. The man in front of Kale was Harrel Kodiang. Harrel, long time no see. The man who had a total hatred of magic seemed much better than a year ago. Where is Tunka? I am right here. Kale let go of Harol's hand and looked toward the sound of the voice. Screech. The rusty iron gate opened and the large Tunka walked out of the building. Tunka was coming out of the magic tower. This building, which was a reminder of the terrible past for the Whipper Kingdom citizens, was surrounded by weeds. You became the commander-in-chief. Ha ha ha. Yes, I am the commander-in-chief. Tunka laughed at Kale's statement and answered back with excitement. His eyes were sparkling as he looked at Kale. That is why I want to end this reminder of the past before I start working as the commander-in-chief. Tunka definitely gave off the vibe of a crazy bastard. Tunka pointed toward the magic tower behind him as he asked Kale. You will destroy it, just as you promised. Part of the deal last year was that Kale would destroy the magic tower. Tunka looked like he would kill Kale if Kale did not plan to hold up his end of the deal. Of course, that could never happen because of Choi Han and the others behind Kale, but that would be what Tunka would want to do. You see. Kale started to speak. Neither Tunka nor Kale had changed much in this past year. Kale then continued on with his usual indifference. I am someone who keeps my word. Both of them started to smile. I'll make it quite the sight. And I'll make a profit in the process. The value of the documents and the seed he had found in the underground lab last year had gone up by quite a bit. Kahahahaha. Tunka let out a loud laugh. He seemed to like Kale's words quite a bit. At that moment, Rayon started to speak into Kale's head. Human. Human. You know. Kale flinched at Rayon's sudden words. He always got uncomfortable whenever Rayon acted like this. What was he planning to say this time? To be honest with you, I enjoy breaking things. That is why I am very excited right now. Let's blow it away. Rayon was excited while thinking about blowing up this historic monument. Rayon's statement actually made Kale start to smile. We're actually thinking the same thing for once. Rayon and Kale were both feeling the same way. Honestly speaking, Kale was excited as well. He was excited about the show that would soon take place. Chapter 120. Although Kale was excited, seeing Tunka laughing like a lunatic was still not a pleasing sight. You'll break it tomorrow? Tunka looked like a kid wanting to know what his birthday present was as he asked Kale the question. That was why Kale decided to heighten Tunka's expectations. No. What? Tunka, as well as Harol and the other chiefs, all stiffened up. Kale looked at their stiff expressions and gave a refreshing answer. Breaking is too light of a word. I will destroy it completely. What? Ahahaha. Kale could see Tunka laughing maniacally before walking over to the base outside of the magic tower with his arms open wide. Many soldiers came over to greet Tunka as he started to shout. Did you hear? This symbol of hate will soon disappear. A new history of the Whipper Kingdom will soon begin. Boom. 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 The soldiers started to stomp their feet and cheer. I'm getting tired of this. Kale was tired of their barbaric ways. Harol Kodiang suddenly approached him and peeked toward Choi Han, Locke, and Rosalind, who were all standing behind Kale, before starting to speak to Kale. Young Master Nim, you must have been shocked at the number of soldiers here. We were training nearby and brought everyone over after learning that you were heading our way. Training nearby. What a load of bullshit. Kale was certain that they brought the soldiers over to raise their morale from watching the magic tower go down. But Kale didn't really care about that. He slowly started to speak. I guess that makes sense. It's fine if more people come over. It'll be quite a show. Of course, Kale was someone who worked hard, even for things he didn't really care about. Everybody is gathering to watch the explosion. Oh, they will know the greatness of my magic bomb. It would be better if more people were around to see it. Harol started to observe Kale after seeing how calm Kale was. This was someone who knew his secret. However, a whole year had gone by without Kale blackmailing him nor even asking for anything. He then came back to complete his end of the deal from last year. By the way, how will you destroy the magic tower? Magic. Excuse me. Kale started to smile after seeing Harol's shocked expression. Kale was planning to use magic in front of people who hated magic. What? How else would you destroy it? Harold looked toward Kale's hand that was now on his shoulder. Pat, pat. The hand that was patting his shoulder suddenly stopped moving as Kale started to speak again. Isn't it quite entertaining to destroy the magic tower, the symbol of magic, using magic? Harold turned to look at Kale after hearing his jovial tone. Stay in your lane. Your part of the deal was that it was up to me what I did with the magic tower and how I destroy it. Kale's tone implied that he would not allow them to step out of their lane again. Harold could see Kale and his group. Choi Han had easily taken care of Tunka the last time that they were here. The rest of them seemed to be almost as strong as him. Those experts were staring at him and Kale. Kale quietly whispered in Harold's ear. You're also not in a place to tell me what to do. Harold let out a sigh. The men who knew the secret of his birth came back after a year to shove it in his face while telling him to stay in his lane. Harold's gaze started to slowly turn colder. This was the Whipper Kingdom, his territory. However, Kale continued to speak at that moment. You have this kingdom in your hands and live however you want. I'm the same way. Harold's gaze, that was turning colder by the second, suddenly turned into confusion. I'm the same way. That sentence echoed over and over in his ears. He looked up and made eye contact with Kale, who continued on in a pleasant tone. I'll stay in my lane, so you stay in yours. Harold, whose physical appearance made him look like a good person, slowly started to smile before he finally ended up laughing. Ha, ha ha dash dot. He laughed for a while until he noticed Tunka returning toward them and finally greeted Kale with a smile. You are still the same, young Master Kale. That is why I am even happier to see you again. Of course. I am still a lover of peace. Once again, you have that smile you have when you meet with the Crown Prince. Kale ignored Rayon's comment and made eye contact with the still excited Tunka. However, Tunka's gaze was pointed at Choi Han, who was standing behind Kale. Want to fight again? It'll be fun to beat up a commander-in-chief. Choi Han's gaze seemed to be full of annoyance as he brushed aside Tunka's provocation. Tunka did not cower at Choi Han's comment and instead seemed to get even more excited as he started to mumble. He smells like he's gotten even stronger. Kale's shoulders flinched. Choi Han became even stronger. He slowly turned his head to look at Choi Han, who slightly bowed his head. I am always working hard to protect everyone. Why? You're already super strong. Why do you need to do that? Based on what Miss Watira said, I believe it was the right decision. Choi Han's pure yet chilly smile was visible to Kale. He quickly turned his head away. I have a bad feeling about this. He was worried that Choi Han wanted to participate in the Tiger Tribe and Whale Tribe's attack to decimate the secret organization's 1st Battle Brigade. Kale knew that he just needed to turn around and ask Choi Han to find out the answer, however, he could not do so. He had an ominous feeling. That was why he chose to change the topic of conversation. He casually started to speak to Tunka. Tunka, how about a celebration tonight? A celebration? Kale feigned excitement and responded back to this idiot who did not seem to understand. Yes. A pre-celebration of the destruction of the magic tower. What do you think? Ha. I like it. You really are not like those rotten nobles. You know a thing or two. Know a thing or two. I guess I know that you are on a train to hell. This fool was planning on charging into the Empire instead of attacking the jungle first. Kale observed Tunka, who was happily telling the chiefs to plan a celebration. He then slowly looked toward his group and started to speak. Let's rest a bit. They needed to rest now so that they could move around at night. Night soon arrived. Kale had a look of doubt on his face as he looked down. Choi Han and Rosalind were talking about the bombs they would use tomorrow on one side of the tent while Kale just continued to look down with his arms crossed. This is very doubtful. Not at all. We can do a good job. She's right. Nuna, Rayon, and I are the best. I am great and mighty. An, Hong, and Rayon all shouted in a row. However, this only made Kale frown even more. He didn't know whether they could do it. But it's not like I can take out the people who are supposed to participate in the celebration. Choi Han, Locke, Beecrox, Rosalind, Ron, Pendrick, and Kale were all scheduled to celebrate with Tunka. The red kitten, Hong, confidently stepped forward and stood in front of Rayon and On as he opened up his chest. The three of us can even destroy a castle. That was technically true, since Rayon alone was enough to do that. But Kale was worried that they would just cause a mess without doing things properly. Kale kicked the large box next to him. Dong. The box sounded like it was full. The items that they had found last year in the underground research lab were inside this box. A mana storage device that uses the principles of ancient powers. The reason for developing magic resistance. It included the research documents for those two topics. Furthermore, there was a seed as well. Of course, these were only half of the things Kale had gained from the lab. To be specific, it was the half that was useless. You need to put this back there properly. Got it. Kale could see the 5-year-old Rayon click his tongue and let out a sigh. Weak human, we are stronger than you. Stop nagging. Ho. Kale couldn't believe it. However, On and Hong nodded in agreement as well. Rayon flicked his front paw and the large box floated up into the air and turned invisible. We'll be back. Human, you are weak, so don't drink too much. Kale was full of disbelief and could not say anything. Hong approached him and patted Kale's foot with his front paw. We'll be back really fast. Can I play hide-and-seek with Nuna and youngest bro inside of the magic tower once we're done? Sure. Hong and Rayon snickered as they stealthily left the tent, while On patted Kale's thigh so as to tell him that she will take care of it. She then slowly left the tent as well. Kale brushed his face with both hands. He knew that they would get it done properly, so why was he feeling so iffy? However, Kale ended up feeling a different kind of iffiness after seeing the next person who came into his tent. Excuse me, young Master Nim. Yes. Will we be heading to the lair after this? The Gold Dragon's lair, where an ancient dragon lives. Just thinking about it made it hard to breathe. Of course. He had to go there. How could he not when Rayon, the strongest member of their team, wanted to go? Then I will contact Gold Dragon Nim in advance. I'm sure he'll be very happy. Sure. Young Master Nim. Do you think that once we get there? What? The handsome elf seemed embarrassed. Kale was starting to get impatient when Pendrick cautiously started to speak once again. Do you think that I will be able to meet the Dragon Nim protecting you as well once we get there? Yes, you'll be able to meet him. I see. I'm sure that I am the only elf who will get to meet 2 Dragon Nims at once. Kale nodded his head with an indifferent expression on his face. Life forms like this that were super energetic and pure really did not mesh well with him. I guess so. Oh, and will we meet the person I am to heal on our way back? Kale's expression became serious. Yes, we will meet them afterward. Yes, sir. I understand. He had asked Tasha to contact Mary when he met Tasha at the capital. Tasha looked toward Kale with a warm gaze when he had told her it was regarding getting rid of Mary's pain, but Kale had pushed the memory aside, as he had found Tasha's warm gaze to be annoying. Then I will not disturb you any longer, as it is already so late. Pendrick did not use transformation magic, instead, he just lowered his hood in order to cover his ears as he headed out of the tent. Kale let out a sigh and looked toward the 2 people still in the tent. Choi Han noticed his gaze and started to smile awkwardly. How is it going? You see. It was rare to see Choi Han answering like this. However, Kale did not give Choi Han even a moment to answer, as he sternly responded. You must make sure to do a good job. Yes, Kale Nim. Kale heard Choi Han's weak response before pointing toward the entrance of the tent. I guess it is time we join in on the drinking. Sure, young Master Kale. As you say, Kale Nim. Kale opened up the flap of the tent and headed out. He could hear laughter and singing throughout Tunka's base, even though it was late at night. Kale looked in the opposite direction for a moment. The children, who now averaged 8 years old, were probably working hard right now. Kale hoped that Tunka's group would celebrate even more as he walked toward them. The next morning after the celebration. The day that the magic tower would disappear into history was finally here. Kale looked up at the magic tower with his arms crossed. The magic tower was known for having 20 floors above ground and 3 floors underground. It no longer had the extravagance it used to have in the past. All that stood in front of him was a rusty building filled with the aura of death. Kihihi, I'm looking forward to this. Kale looked over to his side and made eye contact with Tunka. Tunka, who still looked a bit hungover, was smiling. Although someone might think that he was crazy, his gaze was still sharp. Our citizens, a large number of our brothers, were killed because of that magic tower. I'm a bit disappointed that you are destroying it with a magic bomb, but that's entertaining as well. You are right, Commander Tunkanim. Our history will soon begin. Harold Kodiang added on from Tunka's side. There were many soldiers stomping the ground and banging the ends of their spears on the ground with anticipation. Kale Nim. Choi Han approached Kale at that moment. We are ready. Really? Kale's gaze headed back to the magic tower. A couple of black magic bombs were placed around the tower. This is the great and mighty Rayon's newest magic bomb. This was Rayon's magic bomb, version 5 years old. I will detonate it once you give the signal. Rosalind gathered her mana and waited for Kale's command. Rosalind, who had been using magic to disguise herself since coming to the Whipper Kingdom, was calm. Kale looked toward Tunka and started to speak. We'll detonate it soon. Wouldn't it be good to let the soldiers know? Kihihi, you think so? Tunka walked over to his soldiers and opened up his arms. He looked like he had something to say again. Kale, who was not interested at all in what Tunka had to say, walked over to Rosalind in order to give the order. However, Harold started to approach him. Harold, the secret son of the Magic Tower's liege. Harold looked toward Kale and gently started to speak. You must be disappointed, young Master Kale. About what? You didn't manage to get anything out of the Magic Tower, and even have to blow it up after doing nothing with it for a year. I definitely am disappointed. Not really. I'm very excited. Kale had a bitter smile on his face as he casually responded back. I'll just treat it as throwing some money away. You know that I am rich. You definitely look like a noble when you say something like that. You bet I am. Don't forget it. Kale could feel the ground start to shake as he said that. Boom. 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 Ooh, oh oh, oh oh. The soldiers started to stomp their feet once again as they started to chant. Kale turned to look at them and ended up making eye contact with Tunka. He then raised his hand after seeing Tunka's excited expression. Do it. I am starting the 5-second countdown. Mana started to fluctuate in Rosalind's palm. 5. The soldiers started to stomp even harder once she started the countdown. 4, 3, 2. Rosalind, Kale, Choi Han, Ron, and Beacrox all looked at each other. The mana shot out of Rosalind's palm and rushed toward the magic bombs. 1. Explode. Bang. 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 Multiple sounds of explosions echoed throughout the area. It was so loud that you couldn't even hear the soldiers stomping their feet. This is so exciting. Very exciting. We can destroy it entirely since nobody will get hurt. Rayon was excited about this. Ruiyumble. The magic tower is breaking down. The magic tower started to crumble while causing a dust storm. The dust storm rushed toward the group, even though they were all standing outside the range of the explosion. Muhahahahaha. It's destroyed. It's done. Kale could hear Tunka's laughter and the cheers of the citizens who had been oppressed by magic. Kale turned his gaze to his side again. Crazy bastard. Harold was smiling to the point that it looked like his mouth might rip. This was the case, even though he was trying to hold himself back from smiling. Harold looked excited as he looked toward Kale. You are smiling as well, young Master Nim. Kale was smiling as well. Yes. That was refreshing. It was refreshing watching the magic tower crumble. Kale was smiling while watching this sight that the majority of the continent's mages would cry and lament about. But how could he not? Creak. The magic tower started to tilt to the side, starting from the second floor. Boom dash. It finally tilted completely to the side and crumbled to the ground. Cough, cough. Damn it, so much dust. Kale covered his mouth with a handkerchief to shield against the dust. Human, did you catch a cold? Kale ignored Rayon's nonsense as he looked toward the magic tower that was covered in dust. The destroyed magic tower slowly revealed itself. Boom. 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 Boo. 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 The soldiers became even more excited. Kale felt the excitement behind him as he slowly approached the destroyed magic tower. Choi Han and the others walked in first. Are you trying to take a look at the remains? Harold snickered as he approached Kale. Yes, I want to take a look. Kale smiled and moved to the side, as if he was inviting Harold to walk with him. The two men, who were excited for completely different reasons, slowly walked into the dust cloud. Finally, they could see what remained of the magic tower. Buffed. Harold closed his mouth in order to hold back his laughter. The 20-story magic tower was gone, and they could see the remains on the ground. You must be very happy. Harold nodded his head without looking at Kale. He was so happy that it could not be explained with words. He had longed to see this for such a long time. Magic would never enter the Whipper Kingdom ever again. This brought Harold immense amounts of joy. At that moment, he could hear Kale's calm voice. I'm happy as well. Harold felt odd hearing Kale's comment. Kale didn't seem like he was just playing along with him. He really sounded like he was happy. Harold slowly turned to see Kale smiling. At that moment, they heard someone's voice. Huh. It was Choi Han. Kale's eyes started to get cloudy. The show was about to start. Choi Han pointed to the underground that was visible through the broken part of the first floor. Yes, down there, in the now slightly visible secret fourth floor underground, was the box that Rayon and crew had moved last night. Kale was waiting to hear Choi Han's script that would signal the start of the show. The words that Choi Han had been practicing for many days slowly started to come out. What is this? This is odd. Should I report this to Kale Nim? Ah, what terrible acting. While Kale wanted to grab Choi Han by the collar, Beacrox pushed Choi Han back and looked down where Choi Han was looking at. There is something there. Like a good assassin, Beacrox's acting was fabulous. Beacrox looked toward Kale. The majority of the documents were destroyed by the explosion, leaving behind only the slightest amount of research documents. Kale had set it up. This was on purpose. Beacrox started to speak. Young Master Nim. It was now Kale's turn.